And welcome back to the Book and Life podcast. Today we're going to have a brand new book guest on. Whether they're an author, an editor, a producer, you'll never quite know, so you're in for one hell of a ride. But today I just have to do the adverts and then I'll get us straight into that most important conversation. And as we do every week, I'm going to read The Shadow, which is part of the Time Guardian series, and this is book 4 from Marianne Curley. The battle is over, the war is won. The prophecy complete, but life can't just pick up where it left off for Ethan, struggling to cope with tragic loss. At odds with friends in the guard, he finds himself adrift, jumping in shadows and sensing someone who can't possibly be there. Blaming herself for the goddess Athena's death, Giselle swears revenge, to vilify the Immortals' plan for world domination. But Giselle hadn't planned on love, and that leaves her with an unbearable choice. Should she follow her heart, or the strings of a goddess short on praise but high on expectation, who continues to pull her from the grave? As the Guard and the Order battle through the past and into an impossible future, darkness lurks round every corner. The fight for the world's survival rests with just one. Is it friend or foe who stands in the shadow? And just a reminder that The Price of Freedom by Rosemary Rowan, is being donated to the Ukraine refugee crisis. And here's the blurb for her book. It's one of her Roman British crime series, which was written under her maiden name. All editions can be found online where all books are sold, even her agents donating her commission. Sorry, I don't have the blurb for that, but that's what she's doing. And now, without further ado, let's get you to the guests. Well, guys, I did promise you somebody amazing. And I am coming through. So after we've had the amazing, experience of Catherine and Liz, we are now coming back to the UK. It's a wonderful history section with a man who's got such talent in his fingertips. I'm surprised Merlin hasn't kidnapped him and taken him back in time to rewrite the world of time, and the world of history. So, you are not going to believe the guest we've got on, and I am so honored he's come on, and he's going to have some fun with us. So let's be gentle with him, guys. So without further ado, please welcome Gareth Williams.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be here.
I did kind of imagine of Merlin kidnapping you to write history for him.
Well, I've got friends who write in that particular period, so it'd be great to feature in one of their books.
Yeah, I just had this a lovely kind of idea of you walking along the street one day and then going poof because Merlin stole you to rewrite history. And
sounds fun.
Yes, I could see something like that happening to you. So tell us about your latest book, Serving Shaka.
Serving Shaka.
Right?
So Shaka was a Zulu warrior who had a very difficult childhood, living in a very small clan. His mother was disowned by his father, and so he lived on the very fringes of society, and despite that had the ambition to rise and come to dominate the whole area in which he lived. And he turned himself from this outcast into effectively what I guess we call an emperor, and he founded and developed a very militaristic state, which was the foundation of the Zulu people, who continue to be such an influence in southern Africa today. So he's one of the key characters. That's where the title comes from, but that's not the only thing the book's about. So Serving Shaka is a sequel to a book I wrote last year called Needing Napoleon, and it features a history teacher I was a history teacher before I retired. Write about what you know, they say. And but I'm also writing about time travel, which I don't know about personally, but I've done, I've watched the movies, I've read the book, and Richard Davey, the history teacher, he's an expert in kind of French Napoleonic history, and he's always wondered why Napoleon managed to lose the Battle of Waterloo when he clearly should have been able to win it with the resources he had, with the expertise, with his track record. Anyway, keep it short, the first bit. He travels back in time. I won't give away how or that happened, and tries to influence the outcome of the Battle of Waterloo. It doesn't quite pan out as he hopes. But anyway, he finds himself in exile with Napoleon in the middle of the South Atlantic on the island of St. Helena, which which used to be an East India Company base for trading around the world. And when the British decided that they needed to stick Napoleon somewhere where he wasn't going to come back from, having tried it with Elba in the Mediterranean, and that was too near, and the 100-day comeback happened. They picked one of the most distant points on the Atlas that was under their control, moved the East India Company out and stuck Napoleon in there with a load of soldiers guarding him and a Royal Navy squadron patrolling around the island, and said, there you go, stay there, keep out of trouble. Anyway, in my second book, Serving Shaka, Richard Davey helped Napoleon escape the island of St. Helena and head for the nearest landfall. And if you get an atlas out, or you Google it, you'll find that St. Helena is slightly closer to the African continent than it is to the South American continent, but it's a long way from anywhere. It's 3,500 miles from anywhere. Anyway, so in Serving Shaka, they end up pretty much shipwrecked on the coast of South Africa, and get captured by the local tribe and handed over to their overlord, who by this time is Shaka Zulu, who is beginning to build his empire. He's in the early stages of that. And suddenly you've got the former emperor, Napoleon Bonaparte, interacting with the wannabe emperor, Shaka Zulu, and that brings in some interesting opportunities. The dates all work, by the way. Shaka was developing his state whilst Napoleon was on St. Helena, so I haven't had to fake any of that. But what I have done is wondered what might happen if Shaka had access to the military mind of Napoleon and Napoleon's knowledge of artillery and musketry, rather than him being dependent upon stabbing spears and shields and weight of numbers in military terms. So Serving Shaka is really an exploration of how these two very military figures interact, and how, to some extent, Richard Davey, the teacher, plays referee between them.
I love that. And you can almost sort of see them kind of making their way into either America or Africa, and the sort of domination that comes from that. Because you know that the two aren't going to quit. Napoleon was known for never giving up. And that's what made him such a force of nature. So I could see this going really well. I think this is a great book.
Thank you. I mean, I think you're right that Napoleon never gave up, except, of course, really in the end in St. Helena, he did give up in real life because he simply couldn't. He wasn't well either.
No. It was his health that failed him, I think.
Absolutely. So I also have a section of the book where he gets healed, essentially, by you can't call them witch doctors in the modern world, but the equivalent of a herbal
herbalist,
exactly, which allows me to have his character live beyond his natural span as well, because there's a third book now which is in production, and my wife, who's also my editor, bless her, is nagging me for a fourth book in the series because she can't cope with where I've left the third one.
Right.
So she wants some resolution, and funnily you should say America, because America does feature will feature in the fourth book.
And it's funny because, like, when you were saying, as soon as you said where it was, I was like, well, the biggest, most powerful area for them to go would be the States. like, and especially at that time when it was such an untouched, powerful resource as well.
I mean, that's true, but obviously the East Coast was developed, and in fact, many of Napoleon's family, after the defeat at Waterloo, went into exile in America, and one of his direct descendants was the mayor of Baltimore.
That does not surprise me. You gotta also think that part of his relatives and his family must have been in a situation where they were like, they can't resist the climb to power, the power being such a draw to them. So I could see them being in positions of power, and descendants of him even today I could see being in positions of great power.
You're quite right, because it was only 1848 when the next member of the family became the most powerful person in France. Louis Napoleon, direct relative, was elected president and then declared himself emperor a few years later, and ruled until 1870, when he went into retirement. The British allowed him to retire to Chislehurst in England, live the life of a country squire, and his son, the Prince Imperial, accompanied the British Army in their wars against the Zulus in the 1870s, and was killed out there by the Zulus, fighting effectively alongside the British, which is a lovely arc. If only I could work out a way of doing it, could be a beautiful end to my book series one day.
I think maybe it could be that lesson that he manages to be able to pass through time, whether it's a secret document or a secret letter hidden in a quilt, or hidden in a way that passes it through one generation to the next. I think that would be an awesome way of doing that.
Yeah. Well, I've stopped myself thinking about that at the moment, because it will get in the way of my work in progress. But things are happening.
You can always make notes on the side, though. Like, you could have a pad of paper and just...
And I probably will. You're quite right.
Yeah, I mean, I find myself doing that, and it's so annoying. I know what you're saying about that, because I was doing something completely unrelated. I was doing this sort of uplifting kind of story with horses and disabled children and therapy, and I had to stop so many times because I was getting ideas for, like, oh, I could do this, or for this thing, or oh, I really should be doing that for this story. And it was very annoying because I had to keep stopping and making these notes so that I wouldn't forget, because they were important to what I needed to do. So yes, I have fully understanding your pain on this one. So what about your upcoming one? Because it's Rescuing Richard. Tell us a little bit about that.
So Rescuing Richard is just a continuation, really. And if I could get a publisher who would just have published an enormous book, I'd have published all three as one great big book, really. Because they are one great big book. Because, like so many of us, we had lockdown and we had to do something, and I had this story that had been hanging around, and I thought to just sit down and write it. And I aimed to write just one 90,000-word book, and effectively, between the two lockdowns and a bit of extra time, I wrote 3 times that much. So Rescuing Richard is really, I suppose it's, without obviously doing it, it's slightly turning the lens on the history teacher character rather than these big historical figures that he's interacting with. They're still around, but it's a little bit more about him trying to find his place. He got hurtled back 200 years into the past on a kind of whiff, if you like, and it's a one-way ticket. That's my the way I framed it. There's no possible way he's ever coming back to the present. He's made his bed and he's got to lie in it. But living in 1815 or 1820 or 1825, which is what he's found himself doing in these 3 books, It's not like living in 1920 or certainly 2020 as we do, 2022.
Yeah.
So he struggles with that quite a lot. But in the third book, he starts to make peace with what he's done, where he is, and he's been there long enough, obviously, that he's made meaningful connections with people. And in fact, he gets married in the third book.
Wow.
But he gets married in the third book, and has a child, and that's a big deal. It's unsurprisingly changes his perspective quite a lot. But for all of that, it's not a third book where he settles down and starts living, becomes a farmer, and it's all lovely, and they have land, and it's super. It's not like that at all. In fact, he ends up as an ambassador for the Zulu nation in London, representing them along with one of the Zulu leaders, and gets embroiled in other stuff that references back to certainly the first book. I'm trying not to give too much away here. Things start to connect, but other threads also are developed which need resolution, which is why one day there will be the fourth book. So
yes,
all I can say about the third book, which isn't out yet, is that when I sent it to my publisher, I got an email that said, "You've sent me this very rare thing, an almost perfect book." And a bit weepy and lost all perspective, as you can imagine, because we all love praise, and we sit in our little rooms tapping away, and
we all want that moment of
I've never been
praise,
very brave about sharing works in progress before, so they're kind of newborns when they go out there, and so when someone says you've got a cute baby, it's it puts a smile on your face. But anyway, it turned out that wasn't what he really meant at all. Well, it sort of was and it wasn't. So he wasn't saying, "Oh, you're the next Shakespeare, it's amazing." What he was saying was, your spelling, punctuation, and grammar is actually perfect, and you've done a proper editing job, and I haven't got anything to correct. That's really what he meant. Perfect in that sense, not the best book ever written. But anyway, I had that 5 minutes where I was under the illusion that my publisher had been so bowled over by my literary prowess, which was a nice 5 minutes. Anyway, pretty smart.
It was, and we all need those 5 minutes, to be fair.
But at least he says, I know how to edit a book now, which probably after, doing 3 in a bit over a year, I should do.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
no, I get that.
So
I think I'd love to get that sort of credits one of these days, because my dyslexia means I don't think I'll ever put out that perfect.
Well, it's down to my
book,
editor, who Helen, my wife, is my editor, and she's a linguist by university experience, and so she's got a great eye for all those tiny little subtleties which publishers and editors care about, and to be honest, we probably don't. I'm offending a lot of people there, sorry, but I like to get the story out there, and I like it to flow well. But whether that word should be hyphenated or not, to be honest, if it's obvious in context, I don't care. But others do. But there we go. Yep.
No, I get that though, because I've been there and I've kind of been like, oh, I really should rethink this kind of idea, but it flows that well that I really don't want to.
Yeah, that's the hard thing.
So
when I'm redrafting, so first draft, exactly like you get it all out there, and then you're very, but it's a hard process, and you're very attached to the words you've written because there's a lot of effort involved. I'm currently working on, having to rearrange stuff quite fundamentally and decide that some bits probably have to go, and in the thing I'm working on at the moment, and that's really much harder than saying it's fine, I like it, because this last piece I'm working on I have let go and I've let other people see it, many more people. So I'm having, there's no point doing that and then not listening to what they say, so that's proving a bit of a challenge to get my head around. The fact that all those words that I laboured over for days and days. Somebody, famously, one of the readers, I wanted a young female reader to work on doing at the moment, and she said, "I don't care about anything in the first 10% of this book." That was her. She's a close relative too, so she's entitled.
Yeah.
You know, she can say what she wants. And I asked her what she wants, but nobody else I gave it to felt the same way she did. But nobody else I gave it to was a 30-year-old single woman, you know, professional, you know, seeing the world the way she does. So it was very interesting. I probably conclude that my book's not for 30-year-old women. Actually, it's probably the reality. This one, but. It did make me look at it again in a different way, which was useful.
Yeah, and so sometimes I know it feels off.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it does feel like, you know, someone's just kind of kicked you in the in your teeth. But there's also kind of an upside to that, because you can almost learn.
Yeah, exactly.
You can be like, oh, okay, so this isn't working for her or them, but I could make this work for other people that would want to read it. Like, it might not be for her class, but it's for somebody else.
I think one of the traps that I think writers fall into, particularly if like for me, it's not my sole way of supporting myself. So I guess it's a glorified hobby. I think there is a danger that you write just to please yourself. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. I take great pleasure in pleasing myself with what I write. But if you want to put it out there in the world, then you do have to take some account of those wonderful people who might actually read it. And they are entitled to be considered in the process. And it's being reminded of that is sometimes very important, because it's quite easy to lose sight of what other people like just because you're indulging yourself.
Yeah. But then also we have to write what's true to us. And I mean, you know, Virginia Woolf said it best, you know, we're responsible to use pen and paper to hold up the mirror to the world.
Absolutely. But if the mirror that we hold up to the world only reflects us, it's not a mirror, right? So I guess that's all I'm saying. I'm not trying to be clever about it. And also, I'm not Virginia Woolf.
No, neither am I, but I do keep it in my mind.
It's a beautiful thing, completely. But I don't have unrealistic expectations of what my books are going to do for the world. If they allow somebody to escape into another world for a while, and that is a positive experience for them for whatever reason, and maybe they enjoy a few of the little facts that I've got in there, because I do a lot of research. They are historical fiction. All the better. But essentially, if they've escaped into that adventurous other life for a while, and that's been a good experience, that's all I'm aiming for. There's nothing more pretentious than that about it.
Yeah. No, I get it. It's sometimes good, though, to have somebody say, well, you know, in the love of what we do, we always have to kind of remember that, you know, our pens come with responsibility too, you know, and I kind of like to remind people of that, because they're like, oh, I never thought of that. And I'm like, well, you kind of need to think about it. Absolutely. It's kind of important. Sure. You know, like, and people always kind of give me the evil eye on that one, and I'm like, well,
I think, so that, I know you may be about to ask me this, but my current work in progress, there's a lot to be said about that. Sense of responsibility in writing what I'm currently writing. It's quite different from my trilogy of adventurous, you know, time travel yarns, where, you know, really there isn't a lot of introspection or a lot of thinking about what does this say about, you know, our modern relationship with the past. Whereas the book I'm currently writing, there's definitely more of that.
Well, that's good. So tell us about this upcoming release that you're really excited about.
It depends if anyone ever, whether it'll get out into the world or not, depends on the publishing world. So
of course,
I've got a working title, which is Captain Liar and the Forgotten Flag, The Life and Death of William Augustus Bowles. That's kind of the title and the kind of subtitle. So William Augustus Bowles is character who I'm effectively writing a fictionalized biography for. And the only way to explain William is to say that he would offend a lot of people in the way he lived his life if he was alive today. He upset quite a lot of people living his life the way he did when he lived it, which was from about 1763 to 1804, something like that. So I'll tell you a little bit about William, and then you can make your own judgment, I guess, about why I chose to write a book about him. But I should just say that the last academic biography written about him was written in the 1960s. So, and although there are a couple of books that are sort of based on him, there's basically very little been written about him except in academic papers. And in academic papers, he's genuinely regarded as a bit of a liar, a bit of a self-publicist, a bit of a chancer, and someone who claimed to have achieved much more than he really did. And I think all of those things are true. But anyway, William was born in Maryland when it was still a British colony, named after Queen Mary. And his parents were English, but he was born out there in a largely German-speaking town called Frederick. And the revolution happened, and his family, being loyalists, either of those, both of those, were on the wrong side of that argument. And his father, having made quite a success of their emigration, him and his wife's emigration, and had risen to be a landowner and so on, found life much less comfortable once the politics of where he lived ran counter to his own beliefs. And William was his father's son, and so he ran away from home at the age of 14 to join the British Army to fight against the rebels, to defend the colonies against the threat of secession from the Empire. And so he goes to Philadelphia and he joins the army, and he ends up as a very junior officer. And as we know what happens. You know, the rebels win. So he's in New York when the British surrender New York, and he gets on one of the transports out of New York, and the one he gets on, he's very lucky actually. Most of the people in his regiment got on a transport that was going up the Bay of Fundy they would go and live in Canada, as we think of it. And that ship sank, and most of those on board drowned. He chose, partly because he had some pals who were going to Jamaica instead with the army, to go on that ship, which didn't sink. So it would have been a really short, not very interesting story. But anyway, he ends up in Jamaica, and the British then send quite a lot of troops to Florida, which they still control, to defend Florida against threats from both the Americans as they head south, and from the Spanish, who still had a large territorial possession based around New Orleans. So he's there for a while, and he really, really wants action. He saw no significant action in the American Wars of Independence. He's done nothing in Jamaica except gamble and, chase ladies, to be honest. And now he's in Florida, and he wants some action. And his regiment is decimated by disease. They have a cholera outbreak. They have a smallpox outbreak. Half of them die. He's fine, but he's bored. He's stuck in Pensacola with nothing to do. And one day he's on the beach and he sees a band of Creek Indians, and he just deserts and disappears into the woods with the Indians. And it's the start of a completely new life. He reinvents himself. And the short version of the story is he reinvents himself. He gets himself elected as a representative of the lower Creek peoples. And along with 2 or 3 Cherokees and 2 or 3 Creek chiefs, although technically the Creeks don't really have chiefs, he leads an embassy to London to see the king, to ask for the king's protection for an independent confederation of Indians in that part of North America that would be a loyal colony for the British. And he meets Pitt, Greville, the Prince Regent, almost everybody, and he's due to appear at a royal levee to be received by King George III. And a day or two before he's due to be received by the King, the Spanish and the British had been at loggerheads, and it looked like they were going to go to war, and the British were very keen to have allies in that part of the world, which is why it's going to be received by the King. And the Spanish and the British signed a document that took kind of war off the table, and so they cancelled his invitation to see the King at the very last minute. But anyway, he goes back and reports that he's been totally successful, because this is the kind of liar that he is. And long story short, he starts agitating militarily against the Spanish outpost in the area. In the end, the Spanish capture him, and he's in Spanish captivity for 7 years before he escaped by jumping out of a porthole of a ship, swimming across a bay in West Africa, getting onto an American privateer that takes him in a roundabout route to London again, comes back to Florida, and this time declares war on Spain, establishes a privateer navy which seizes Spanish ships on behalf of the British. Not that they've asked him to do this, but he's doing it. So he's taking his people, his adopted people, to war against Spain. He's seizing ships. He seizes the Spanish outpost and holds it for 5 weeks against the Spanish. But you know where this is going to end. It's never going to end well for him. And at the age of 40, he's recaptured, and they imprison him in Havana, in the big fort on Havana Harbour called the Morro. And rather than turn coat or agree that he'll stop his activities, he starves himself to death at the age of 42. So that is William Cole's life.
Pretty hardcore, so
he's quite a character.
And
of course, the reason I say he's pertinent to the things you were talking about is, how should we think about someone who, adopts native dress, co-opts their cause for his own? Does he pose as their leader? By all accounts, he's elected, but what lies has he told them in order to gain their favour? How should we see this guy? And the academics of the last 30 years have taken the view that he was a troublemaker out for himself and was largely despicable, which is also, of course, what the Spanish thought, because he was such a thorn in their side. I've taken a slightly less critical view, and I've tried to see him as a man. And I've tried to...
I think he was just doing what he needed to do to survive.
Just survive. Yeah, but he felt... I portrayed him as someone who feels he's got a sense of destiny, and he has to realise that in some concrete form, and that drives him.
Of course.
I should also say he marries into the Creek tribe, has children with his wife, who's called Mary, who is herself actually of mixed blood. And there's a whole lot of issues around how you portray these things to a modern audience, which will include William's descendants, but will also include many people who decry the way Europeans use their influence over the tribes for their own benefit. There's a lot in there that I've had to wrestle with, and I'm still wrestling with in the way I write it.
And it sounds like you've put in the effort, you've put in the time, you've put in the thought to this, and it sounds like it should be a really good hit for you, especially considering how everyone's turning to history at the moment. In a way, it's because history has happened and they know the outcome, and it's, I hate to say this, but it's a safe outcome.
Yeah.
Compared to, what our life at the moment's like, where we don't know what's going to happen or when, and that kind of constant, I think, worry that we all have got now. So I think it's wonderful to sort of have that kind of detail-orientated story.
I think you're right. I think, as I was saying before, that's a great gift that literature can give anybody is that opportunity to stop worrying about their current existence and maybe also recognise that some of the things that drive all of us have always driven people, all the time. And at the end of the day, somewhere in the book I say or have a character say, after all, he was just a man, trying to live a life, and
exactly.
he was without a doubt a terrible, terrible husband.
Yeah.
Without a doubt, and probably an even worse father. I don't know. Maybe he was a worse husband actually. But in all those struggles, we all see echoes of our lives, other people's lives, and I think that's the thing that academia always gets inevitably sort of ignored is the human perspective. Sometimes, if you're an academic historian writing about a particular event, then it's a little bit like describing the pieces on the chessboard rather than wondering what that guy on the horse feels like when that's happening.
Because emotion isn't part of the academic study.
Emotion's not part of it, but also in a funny sort of way, although understanding motives and so on it's almost motives judged objectively rather than, well, how does this guy actually feel and what made him the way he was? Why, for example, did William always hate people who spoke German? Well, it's because he grew up in a largely German-speaking town where they used to beat him up down the alley mostly for not being like them, and that he carried that with him for a while until he let it go. And we all have those formative experiences, and there we go.
I think you did an amazing job explaining that to people, because there is that kind of element of humanism to it, and I think that is something we need to try and kind of keep a hold of. And I think I think it's great that we've got all this way of looking at academia and everything else, but we also have to understand that it's the psychology that we need to remember when it comes to history, because it's the way that people were treated, it's the way that people felt that led to the things that happened.
That's right.
We need to kind of keep that in mind when we're going and we're learning about all this, because if we don't understand how a group of people felt, then how are we going to stop ourselves from making that same mistake?
That's very well said. Funnily enough, I chair the local readers and writers group on the island because I didn't move fast enough at the meeting. I think is how I ended up with the job. Anyway, I picked up a writer who was giving us a talk last week, and he's very well known locally. He's written some marvellous books, both about things that happened in the local area and everywhere else. He's a lifetime journalist, and he's a sharp character. And I was telling him a little bit about bowls in the car, and I said kind of the sensitivity issue around it and how you're going to offend some people even for addressing the subject. And he said, but you have to wonder whether those Indians felt like they were being taken advantage of, or whether they felt that they were gaining an advantage from associating themselves with
William. Even were aware of it.
Well, exactly. Yeah, but I just thought it's a fair comment. Is it entirely by accident that a lot of the chieftains of that region in that period were themselves of mixed blood? I mean, there was clearly a reason why it was seen as beneficial to have a leader who had a foot in both camps, and that makes sense logically. When they're dealing with living on a frontier where there's friction.
But they also understood, they kind of had an understanding of inbreeding way before we did.
Well, that's right.
And I think that was part of that issue, was that they were like, okay, we need to look at having people outside of our own tribes mix with us, because we're starting to see issues with the ones that, they see the health issues, and there's nothing they can do about that. But there's nothing that they can do to make it better.
I think that.
So I think.
Yeah, I mean that may not have been the issue with this particular group at that time, but clearly with small population groups, that very much can be. But I think what this guy Roger Hutchinson was saying to me was, is it really William doing it to them, or actually is it just as much them choosing to do it?
Do it to
him. I thought that was quite right. There's definitely two voices here to be heard. So.
I agree. I think he's right in a way, but I like to always play devil's advocate.
Oh.
and I always like to say, well, but, did they actually know? Or did they even care? Did they see this as a way just to protect their community at all costs?
Well, they're very interesting because status in Greek society passes matrilineally. So it's the women who give their offspring status, not the men, which is really interesting. So the reason why William's children went on to be influential in the tribe after his death is because their mother was the daughter of a king. And came from a high status group, if you like. It wasn't him, so he might have at the time that, that he was doing all of this have been quite renowned or infamous in the region. But the reality is it was his wife, who's long suffering, or I don't know whether she really did put up with him or not, but anyway, the mother of his children, she's the reason that his children went on to have influential lives in their community. Which, at least that part of the story plays pretty well in a modern society.
There's always this great saying of, there's always these great women behind, these successful men, and I think particularly back in those days that was definitely the case.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was definitely true.
But they're very silent in history, for obvious reasons.
They had to be.
It's just the way it was bound to be. And it's great that many female writers of historical fiction are reclaiming a lot of those stories, and that's the great place, the great role that historical fiction can play for sure. The difference, of course, is that there are lots of landmarks that do exist about William's life. There are very few about his wife's life in comparison.
But was that maybe by her own design?
I don't know. I suspect not. I suspect it's just the way historical records were
kept.
Men kept records about men and high politics, and not about the powers behind the throne. Because after all, William was never going to say it's all down to my wife, because he was a great self-publicist, and that wasn't in his personality.
But I would be interested to see if they do find documents that maybe she's written or there has been captured by somebody else.
My guess is most of what's come to light has come to light, and that's not happened. And it's punishingly rare that you get, first of all, a literate woman in those societies at that time, which is the biggest handicap. So what you do get is quite a lot of oral history. But the oral histories are they're critical in societies where you don't have the written word. So almost everything of the research I've done about Shaka Zulu, that was a pre-literary society, it is based on what people subsequently wrote down of the oral history. So I'm used to having to struggle with that. But what tends to happen around Bowles is that all the oral histories have confused several characters and turned them into one. Bowles has 3 different personalities. He lived in 3 different states, and he was 3 different people. All mashed into one if you're not careful. I've tried my best to not unravel everything, because sometimes the mishmash is more exciting anyway. But I've tried to not fall into the most obvious pitfalls of assuming that just because someone has the same name, it's the same person.
Of course, because that is an easy assumption to make. That's what I try and do, particularly because I'm writing my own historical, and it's a case of I try to avoid falling into those pitholes of making sure that I'm not one-sided, that I remember that there's more to the story than just one or two names, or one or two opinions, or one or two outlooks to it all. And I try and go out my way for that reason, because I think, what works here? What is it that I'm missing? There's always more to there's not just one side of the story.
Oh.
There's multiple sides to every story.
There are 142 historical characters in my book about William Augustus Bowles.
Yeah.
People who existed, who get a mention. And, you know, a lot of them were living their own lives. They just happened to intersect with something that William was doing. And so you're right, there are lots of different narratives and perspectives about the period, and lots of different ambitions, and lots of people who, you know, for a brief period their interests might have coincided with William's, so they appear to be an ally, but for most of the rest of their lives, you know, their trajectory is very different. So you've got to decide when to stop somewhere as well, of course. You know, I'm not always good at that, so you disappear down some rabbit holes for a while. Sometimes.
We all go down rabbit holes. Let's just be honest here. It's hard to write a book and not go down a rabbit hole or two.
Sure.
You know, and that's what a great writer's for, is almost to just kind of pull us back to the, I would say, to where we should be, and be like, let's get back to where we should be, you know, because I'm terrible for going off on tangents as well, and I think it's because I'm trying to do the story justice.
Yeah, I do, and you know, you find out, the other trouble is, once you become sort of obsessed, for want of a better word, with a character, then everything about him is interesting to you, because he's the thing that you're writing about and you're trying to find out about, and so everything you find out you find interesting. But it's back to our earlier conversation about, it doesn't necessarily mean that the reader's going to find that interesting. So I was just doing a bit of editing this morning, and I had the dimensions of this building in Philadelphia in, because they were interesting to me, because it was quite an important building, because Philadelphia, you know, City of Liberty, it was where a lot of the revolution stuff happened. But nobody cares whether the front of this building was 100 feet long or not. They really don't. Only I cared. Just get a sense of how big it was. But you know, as long as you say it's big, most people are happy. So
exactly.
I'm taking those dimensions out. Sadly, you know, they're in my notebook though. I'll always know.
Yeah, but you know, you've learned something as well. If you could take it in that way.
Absolutely.
So, when it comes to books and the books that you've been reading, what is the book that you've read most recently that you would say has stuck with you the most?
So, funnily enough, it's a book I always meant to read, and my brother and I are very different. So I'm kind of 5'9". I had brown hair, brown eyes. My brother's like 6'1", blonde hair, blue eyes. He took after my dad, I took after my mum. And so if my brother was reading something, I probably wouldn't read it. It was a kind of rivalry thing. By the time I was 12, my brother was 10, he was already bigger than me, and he used to sit on me. So I had to find my own way of being different, and it wasn't going to be physically. So, I was different physically, but I was never going to win that one. So anyway, I can remember my brother reading lots of Ursula Le Guin when we were kids, and so I didn't. Even though it was in a genre that I really was interested in, which is just like cutting your nose off to spite your face, you silly teenage.
Of course,
Anyway, so I decided recently to put that right, and a while ago I found a nice one volume collection of the first 3 of the Erskine novels. And I bought it in a lovely little bookshop in Aviemore in Scotland, and it had kind of sat on my shelf for a while I was doing other things, and I thought I fancy a bit of an escape, so I'm going to read them. And you know, I kind of knew what they were going to be about. What I had not really anticipated is what a great literary figure she was. I mean, she just writes so well. Her descriptions are just so economical and powerful. You know, she treats fantasy like high literature without making it inaccessible, and that must be the greatest accolade I could give her. So they had, you know, they moved me and they inspired me. And one day I want to write a fantasy cycle as well. So you know, I'll never reach her standards, but I feel empowered by having read her work to believe that you know, you can write fantasy with, if you like, literary flourishes without it seeming foolish. And I think that was, so that thing struck me.
Oh, I read her last year, and it was the planet hopping killed it for me because I couldn't get my head around it. And then I felt so bad because I'm like, why am I not understanding this? This is awful, Crystal. What's going on here? But I was doing it for a literacy course, and I've learned that if you're reading for coursework and you're reading for pleasure, it's two different things.
Completely.
You know, and I wish I could pick her up and enjoy her, but also pick her up and understand her a bit better. And maybe in a few years, when I'm a bit older and my reading levels come on a bit more, I might be able to follow the story a lot better than how I actually did. But yeah, she was something of. She was very unique in her thought process and in her detail. I would give you that. Yeah. I found her really interesting.
Yeah.
So if you had infinite time to sit and just read and enjoy, books, you get a series and an author.
Right.
What series would you read, and what author would you read? Now remember, they can't be from the series can't be the same author as you would read.
So I kind of did this. So I'm going to say what I've already done, I suppose. So it's going to sound incredibly pretentious, but it wasn't really meant to be.
Right.
When I was, I guess, at uni, my wife was doing French, mainly French at uni, and I became a bit interested in Marcel Proust's À la recherche de l'époque perdue, so In Search of Lost Time, I guess is the English translation.
Right.
And it's a very, very long series of books, so many, many thousands of pages, which were all sparked by one moment. And the moment was that I think he was in a cafe, I can't really remember, someone will correct me. I think he was in a cafe and he was having a coffee and he was having a madeleine, one of those nice little sponge cakes that they have in France.
Right.
And it was just the taste of a madeleine reminded him of something in his childhood. And from there he wrote basically his life from being a little child to being a kind of young, middle age maybe. And it all started from that one moment. So they're incredibly long, and they are basically intensely descriptive. And a lot of them are about the manners of, kind of the late Victorian period, or maybe a bit later. So they're not a cup of tea, and they take quite a lot of reading, and they're quite heavy. You think Ursula Le Guin can be a bit wordy. These are very wordy because they were written, in their era. But because they're so time. But what you get is an incredible insight into quite an odd man. He's very honest about kind of what's making him tick and how he's interacting and how he's growing. And I think at the time when I was still working out who I was, that's what uni's for after all. I guess that was why it was of particular appeal. But only someone with as much time on their hands as the long summer vacations is probably going to find it easy to get through those tones in any manageable length of years. So that's the long one, the long run. Now, if I go and read an author, I'm kind of torn. I always think I should just go back and read all Shakespeare's plays again. This is what you say.
Okay.
When you're made to study something, it's one thing. When you read it for pleasure, it's another. And I was kind of lucky. I had a good English teacher when I was first introduced to Shakespeare, and so he didn't ruin Shakespeare for me. But having to revise it for exams kind of did ruin the plays that I was revising for exams for me.
Yeah.
But when I was, I guess, about that age, I inherited my grandmother's complete works of Shakespeare, which was her fourth form English prize in 1910. It's got the plate inside it. So it's a precious object because I love my grandmother, and it was hers. And she had to leave school at 14, so that was like the last year she was there. And I've always wondered, would she have been a writer or something? Because she clearly loved the storytelling and all of that. So I kind of think if I'm going to read somebody, I probably will go back to Shakespeare, because in a really pretentious way, I kind of think there's something similar with the way Shakespeare wrote his history and the process of anybody writing a historical novel. Because he basically had Holinshed's Chronicles. These are these outline stories of major historical events, and he just used them to riff off in order to create his story. And isn't that what we all do? We find those kind of touchstones, or the frame of a story somewhere where someone's expressed it nice and clearly, and that's the framework that allows us to then build around it. And I'm no Shakespeare at all, but nevertheless, his process and mine are not that different. I found one book about William Augustus Bowles, and from that spine of that one book's the landmark for the man's life, the book I'm writing is kind of emerging. So there you go. I bet you didn't think you were going to get Proust and Shakespeare as the answer, but there we go.
No, I kind of did because of your passion and the way that you present yourself, and you're such a great voice for that. I actually did.
Good.
I was just curious as to see if it was going to be more modern sort of writers.
It could have been. It could have been.
Changed.
I don't just read classics at all. I mean, I read lots and lots and lots. I mean, so I could as easily have said,
I will put you on the spot. Have you read Catherine Cookson?
I haven't read Catherine Cookson. I'm not big into...
Tut.
No, I know. So I've got a lot of blind spots, and I would say that the kind of covers that Catherine Cookson books had when I was a teenager would make a boy run a mile.
Of course,
that's the issue. I mean, I would still say this applies. So if you look at most romance novels, the kind of covers, particularly in America, that they put on the cover of a book would make most sane people, run a mile. I mean, if you put those covers on the cover of Bridgerton, who would read it? I don't get it. But anyway, so Catherine Cookson.
But what I will say is,
I completely recognise.
Catherine is not romance.
No. But her covers suggest that she is.
Yeah, people make that mistake about her all the time because of the covers and
I did read,
judging books by covers.
I did read women, historical who wrote historical fiction. So Mary Renault was the first who, as a teenage boy, that I read, who, from my eyes, sort of that Greek, the Greek stories, which obviously are so fertile to write about. I was just going to say, if you want me to throw out another name, though, completely, utterly different, I would say I really admire Alexander McCall Smith. Who
you'll have to give us a why
still
for
writing.
that one.
Well, because he is a fantastically talented writer. He has such a command of language. If you read his 44 Scotland Street books, or if you read his Mara Moxway books set in Botswana, they are entirely accessible. They seem to be, it's never really used big words, but that is the same art as Hemingway. The ability, you read The Old Man and the Sea, there's not a big word in it. There's only 100 pages in it, but it's powerful. And Alexander McCall Smith has that same skill, that he is just a naturally talented writer. As I understand it, he doesn't ever have to review anything he writes. He writes at 3,000 words an hour and doesn't have to check it. It's just done. Which is why he's been able for all these years to write a chapter a day in The Scotsman, of the 44 Scotland Street series, in the Dickensian kind of tradition, and keep them pumping out. And I don't know how many of those have been serialised into books now. It must be well into double figures. It's just a charming evocation of his love of Edinburgh and some quirky characters, and it makes me smile. And equally, the book set in Botswana, Mara Moxway, is about his love of that part of the world, which he knows well. But he manages to write in a different style. When he's writing about Edinburgh, it's like somebody from Edinburgh writing about Edinburgh. When he's writing about Botswana, there's a different rhythm. It feels more like, is this what Botswana feels like? And to be able to do that without actually explicitly often describing it, I think is amazing. And so he's prolific, he's very literate, but he's also very economical in use of language. And I often when I'm looking at something I've written and think, but Alexander McCall Smith would have used half as many words, and it would have been more powerful. So get a grip and try and be more like him. So there you go.
I love that. That is pretty awesome answer, to be honest. What author do you wish that you could, if you had a chance to sit down and speak with, and it can be past, it can be present, it can be futuristic, who would you choose and why?
So that's a great question, and I would love to know how Alexander McCall Smith was educated, because I'd love to understand whether it's just natural how he does it. But I'll pick somebody else. So let's pick a different genre as well. So Ian M. Banks, I mean, he also writes Ian Banks, of course. But just thinking about him writing harder sort of sci-fi in that persona, in that genre, it has an amazing imagination, and I think
he does.
And because he operates in those two very different worlds of, really quite literary fiction and something that isn't necessarily seems literary, but again, like Le Guin, I think what he's doing in his genre is taking it seriously and writing about it as if all those people reading it might also be considering it for the Booker Prize, and I think that's marvellous. I just think he'd be really interesting because he's clearly got layers. And I'd like to talk to him about how, that whole image of those interlocking worlds in what he calls the culture, where that all came from, how he developed it. Again, partly to cheat, because although I don't think I'll ever write kind of anything as science fiction as he, I do have an ambition to write, as I say, a fantasy cycle, and I think some of those lessons would transfer well to thinking about world building.
Yeah, no, it would, definitely. And I think everybody that we choose to read and we choose to have in our writing is super important. So yeah, I think it's very, very important, and it's incredible to kind of see and understand. Is there an author, past and present, who has influenced, inspired, and made you excited about books? Now, it has to be a separate author for influenced, inspired, and made you excited.
Oh, goodness me. So I think Bernard Cornwell...
I don't give easy questions
fine.
here.
I think Bernard Cornwell has influenced me in thinking about how to write historical fiction, because I think he does a good job. And I first encountered him reading the Sharp books, which were in the Napoleonic era, which is an era that I write in, and so that's definitely been an influence. I also love the way he's able to turn his hand to so many different periods and seem authentic. So that's something I aspire to. Anyway, so he's one. That was influence. What were the other two words I've got to...
So inspired.
So I've done influence. So inspired.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tricky. Very tricky to pick one. Because there are lots. I'm going to go sort of back a long way, and this again will probably be controversial to some, but I think so. There's a guy who called Captain W.E. Johns, who wrote books from, I think his first book was written after the First World War, through past the Second World War into the 50s. And they're very, very of their time. But they're adventure stories based around, he had several, but the main character that was most famous was a guy called Biggles, who was, a boy's own hero. And Captain W. Johns wrote boys' own books about this hero character, Biggles. He wrote book after book after book after book of them, and they're just rip-roaring yarns for boys. I read my dad, and what's more wonderful than reading the books that your dad read, and you're reading the same book your dad read, many years later. And
it opens up a world that you would never have otherwise experienced.
And these books were set, a lot of them, in the period that my dad lived through, that I was born after. So there was that sense that, because in no way should they be taken as history, They're just adventure stories. But I was kind of thinking about my dad's life and the period in which these books were written, and the fact that Biggles' sidekick called Ginger and my dad's best friend was called Ginger, in a time when, that was the sort of nickname people have. Kind of time. But the bottom line is, it's quite hard to get hold of the books now. You can, but they're not fashionable because they're full of the sort of attitudes of the 20s and 30s and 40s, which sit comfortably with a modern audience. Now, I don't have a problem reading them because I'm a historian by training. I read history at university, and I don't judge someone because they're a product of their time, and I can step aside from that. But I understand why some of the things in those books would offend people. So I'm not saying anybody's right or wrong here. I kind of think it's sad that a lot of good Rick Roaring stories are kind of being missed by generations because of a few what we would now see as misplaced attitudes. But equally, we don't want to perpetuate those attitudes at all. I totally agree. And I'm not really a fan of rewriting people's work.
No, I don't think people's work should be rewritten.
Acceptable. So I guess we just start there. Anyway, so that's Captain W. Johns. I'll fly the flag for him, despite the fact that he's a product of very much the last century. And what was my third?
Excited. Made you excited about books. Yeah.
Excited. What am I going to go for? So I think I'm going to say Stephen Donaldson. So Stephen Donaldson wrote a series of books, fantasy books, where the main character was a leper, he had leprosy, and he finds himself transported to another world, a fantasy world, if you like, and he's completely an anti-hero. He's a coward, he's craven, he doesn't want to be there. Everything he does is self-serving and about self-preservation, but entirely by accident he gets drawn into being like the most fundamental character in the whole of this world, and his choices are shaping everything that's happening in the world. And very gradually, over about 6 books, this series called the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant the Unbeliever, I think they're called, chart, I guess, his development a bit. And I just found them so exciting, so all-absorbing, and I got so immersed in the world that it was a case of you read one to the last page, you just picked up the next one and just kept going. You didn't want to be interrupted or anyone to come near you. So they had that real excitement about them. So yeah, Stephen Donaldson wrote a couple more in the same series many years later. Now I don't know if I changed or whether they were a little bit different, but they just didn't do it for me in the same way, sadly. But the first 6 were just exciting.
I think when we grow, our sort of tastes change and our kind of
but the writer's 20 years older
change.
Too. I wondered. I don't know. I can't objectively do it. I need to go back and read those 6 books again, don't I, to see. But I've kept them. They're on my shelf. So there's another series that's got to be revisited.
I do think though that as we age, it does have an impact on what we like and what we don't like and what we think and what we take for granted. I always like to say, and I think that's very much the case with what we're talking about. And I mean, I myself, there was a lot I didn't like about sort of the historical world that I was reading. And then as I grew older, I kind of understood a lot more of the traditional works because I expanded my worldview and I expanded my education. And I think that's really important. And I think people almost have this attitude of, oh, well, I didn't like that, and they just, they throw it down or they fling it in the bin and, be done with it. And I was never like
No,
that.
I'm totally with you.
I had to look at them.
I followed quite a few Facebook groups where people are forever talking about did not finish book, DNF. I'm thinking, and one or two people are brave enough to say, I never had a DNF. And I'm one of those. I've bought the book or found it. Right? You know, someone took the trouble to write it. I will read it to the end. It might not be my cup of tea. I might not ever read another one, but I'm going to get to the end of it. I mean, goodness me. Why would you give up on a book? I don't, for me.
I think it's also very hurtful to the author to have somebody write that.
And then to out them publicly by saying, I couldn't finish this book. It's like, that's more about you than the book at the end of the day. It says a lot more about your lack of application. Or unless there are other things in the person's life, in which case, just don't post about it, is my view. But, bottom line, read a book, do the author the courtesy of going from the beginning to the end, I would say.
And I think there's so many, there's such this attitude of let's just post everything we feel.
Yeah,
all the time.
A lot of comments about that because I'm nearer 60 than anyone, and so I'm product of a world before the internet, and I don't think it does anybody. It may be hugely cathartic for some people, but I think people expose themselves to more than I would have thought was healthy very often. If it is healthy for them, great, but it doesn't seem to be for many people. And there are a whole series of I'm going to call them illnesses, for want of a better word, that people seem to suffer from now that are a product of the existence of this media, which seems to be tragic. And I think being my age entirely insulates me against any of it. Which makes me the lucky one, I think.
I think it's a shame that people think it's acceptable to hurt other people when they're not having the best time themselves.
Absolutely.
And that is the day and age we're in, where people think it's funny to be rude to people, and it's okay to talk to certain people in a certain way, when actually it's not okay.
I would agree with you.
Yeah. And I've learned, the old saying that my grandmother had of bite your tongue.
Exactly.
But there's only so many times you can bite that tongue.
Well, that's right.
A
nice story. I think it was Eisenhower. Certainly one of the American presidents of the 20th century. I think it was Eisenhower. Said, and I just totally paraphrase, but he said something like, I quite often write a letter in anger. Obviously, we're back in the days of that. But I always put it in a drawer.
Yeah.
And I get it out the next morning. And he says, I've never sent one yet. No. And I think that is exactly what we all need is a filter. And the technology just makes it too easy not to operate a filter. And we've all done something when maybe we've had a couple too many
angry,
whatever. I don't do that online. That at least reduces my exposure. And I freely admit that when I was at university behaving badly, there was no one filming it.
As we did.
It didn't get posted anywhere. So,
no.
My friends will take it to the grave and that's the end of it. And I feel for people whose lives have to be lived under a different level of scrutiny. I think that's awful. And that one of the reasons I write historical fiction is I've said this to my wife more than once, is that I will never write a book which involves the internet or where the internet can exist. Not even will I write a book where the mobile phone exists, because I can't successfully plot a book where those technologies exist, because I don't live in that world. My mobile phone lives in the glove box of my car, and I use it when the car breaks down. I have a landline. Reception on the Isle of Skye has been diabolical for mobile phones until very recently.
It's never had the best. I'll give you that.
It's never been much use to me. So I haven't ever been, I haven't got sucked into that little screen and lived in that world. And I make no apologies about it, and I have to say I'm not sorry about it. And if I'm missing out on book or whatever,
you're not missing out.
Care less. You can see it. I'm smiling away as I say that.
I mean, for me, I did I don't know if you know my work, but I wrote a series called Marie's World, and it was about the idea of how far can a twin relationship be pushed till it breaks.
Right.
And the idea of it was that one twin's made it, she's famous, she's this big dancer, and this other twin, she's super jealous of that. She can't get her head around that her sister's made it and all the rest of it. And so she takes her sister's diaries and she publishes them into the world. All of the bad stuff, all the stuff that you empty out to that safe space is there, and people are reading it. And she flees, and she flees in a way to try and kind of get her head right and to figure out what she's going to do next and how she's going to deal with this. And it doesn't get any better for her, because she has to then make a decision of, do I go back and help the little sister that betrayed me, or what do I do? Like, what is this decision I've got to make? And it's a series, so you're not just getting Marie's version. You get to go into Layla's head. You get to go into the father who was the catalyst of this entire thing. So you get to experience everybody's journey, and you get diary entries, and you get, letters and texts, and I use as many media forms as possible to try and bring people into the present world, but also show them what the present world has done to what would have been two very strong sisters.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and of course they're sisters. So there's that bond that's been betrayed, which is like an even deeper betrayal than if it was his brother and sister. I mean, that.
Exactly, and that's what I thought to myself when I wrote it was. What would be the worst of the worst to for somebody to do to somebody else? And I didn't want to write a murder. I didn't want to write, something along those lines. I wanted to write something that would catch a breath in somebody's lungs and just be like, okay, what can they learn from this? Really so if you do ever venture into a book that tackles those issues, that tackles an issue of, like, what is it that a couple of women would put up with, or how far could a couple of women go, then I would recommend reading that, because I've done it in that humanized way,
absolutely,
that character-based way.
That's fascinating. I've just realised that I suppose I've misspoken slightly, because the book I'm writing about William Augustus Bowles, there is a thread running through it of email exchanges. It starts with email exchanges between one of his descendants and a university professor. So I have actually got email in a book of mine, but it's not set in the period, if you like. That's just a bit of the kind of reflecting some of the issues that are being narrated, being by people with very different perspectives about the character in the present. So I have been brave enough to go down that line to an extent, but there's nothing controversial about their exchanges technologically, although and they do come closer to agreement in some ways about the character, but in the end they are in different worlds, and that remains the case. One is an academic, and he has made a reputation rubbishing William, and the other one is a direct descendant of William, and has a, inevitably, even if she doesn't think he was great in every way, an ambivalent attitude, because she wouldn't have existed without him.
Yeah.
So anyway,
I think that's a really good way of looking at it, and I think we have to kind of come up with these ways of pushing in a way that we're opening people's minds.
Yeah, without preaching. Without
preaching,
telling them how they should think about it.
Yeah.
But at least opening them up to different ways you might think that.
Yeah, and just saying, hey, you know what, things aren't simple.
Right. Yeah.
Things aren't
Absolutely.
easy. You know, there is going to be times where you think, what the hell did I get involved in? Why am I doing this?
Yeah.
But there's always that humanistic. We all need connection.
Yeah, exactly. Quite right.
We all need love, and I think that's what I try to portray through mine, is that, you know, even though her sister's done this terribly cruel thing, she still wants to be loved.
Yeah.
She still wants that attachment, that feeling of bonded to her sister, even though she spent her entire life running after her sister and trying her best to protect her sister at every possible turn, and never being appreciated for it. I think a lot of sisters, you know, as I'm saying this, will be nodding their heads and going, yes.
Yeah, well, I can't speak for sisters, but my brother and I had a. Actually, it's interesting. So I'm now 58 and he's 56, and we get on much better now than we ever have, and we're much more alike now than we ever were. Still pretty different, but even he, I think, would acknowledge that, and that has taken us both by surprise. I think, I don't know if we've ever said it out loud, but, you know, even 20 years ago, we couldn't really hang out together for more than a day. It was best if we were, oh, I'll come and see you for the day, that'd be nice. We were fine, but we were just so different, and it just didn't really, you know. And it's not to say you don't love your relatives, because we're kind of wired that way, but, you know, it was never that easy, and it's a lot easier now. It's quite interesting. You were saying earlier about how we do change our attitudes to books, and I think life as well, of course, because books are a reflection of life. Anyway, enough about that. Another question.
I think it's good, because I think we're teaching, we're accidental teaching. You know, it's like they're accidentally learning how important love is, and about these important facts.
Yeah. You know? Although, why anyone would listen to a 58-year-old man living on the Isle of Skye is anyone.
Why would somebody listen to a disabled 33-year-old woman? I mean, you could have that argument with anyone.
I would feel strongly that, you know, voices that have historically been marginalised really should be listened to. And I'm not saying that just because it's a fashionable thing to say, but as I said earlier, my mum had MS for almost all of my existence. My aunt was born profoundly deaf, so I've lived amongst people whose lives have not been entirely straightforward, and you know, who for much of history were largely forgotten or regarded as embarrassment.
I mean, you're right. We're not given.
I come from that privileged group who have always been listened to, and are now experiencing what it's like maybe to not be listened to so much. It's much harder as a late middle-aged man to get a book published than it is as a younger female writer. And I'll say that, and people might not like that, but it's statistically it's a fact, and it's partly
in some ways, but if
audience.
You have to kind of add in the factors of, I mean, I find it incredibly more difficult to get published because I'm a disabled female writer.
That shouldn't be the case.
And they don't want to work with disabled writers.
Right. I mean, you know, it shouldn't be the case, and it's certainly, you know, given that the vast majority of the fiction readership is female, it shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone that it's now easier as a female to get published than as a male. It's not easy for either gender, by the way, because the published is in a complete turmoil. Because overall, reading is contracting, and they're very risk averse. So they just want to publish, you know,
safe novels,
right? And a lot of other stuff that isn't novels as well. You know, that they know will sell. But anyway,
they know what they're getting into.
I don't want to be on that soapbox today. Let's get off that soapbox. You know, because.
Well, here on the Book of Life podcast, we talk about these things because people are normally too scared to.
Yeah.
And I think, I feel like, honestly, a lot of the time I have to be that voice of reason and voice of, you know, to be able to say, hey, this isn't right. How do we address it?
Yep.
And and go from there, and just be like, okay, what can we do now? How do we get these voices and this industry to be more inclusive? Not just, bring back male writers, but also
right.
to do with everybody. And I think it's a great thing. So that's why I encourage people to talk about it. For sure,
and I'm encouraged. I see a lot more shout-outs from publishers for, diverse voices than ever before. Whether it's lip service or not, I can't judge. But you never used to see that. So it must be, at least, hopefully, the tip of what might become an iceberg.
Yeah. So if you were to travel back in time,
yeah.
Did you enjoy that question?
Well, yeah, because obviously my character in Meeting Napoleon does that, and so I spent quite a bit of time thinking about it. So if I could do it, right? What's the question?
So if you could travel back in time, when would it be, and what job would you choose to do?
Yeah. So I mean, a bit of me would like to go back to the Napoleonic era because it's an era that I've thought about and written about, and it'd be nice to know how close to getting it right.
How close you got it, yeah.
Partly, but also just because I'm interested. It would be quite tempting, but there are a lot of reasons why I wouldn't want to do that, and I think the main there's two really. One is never meet your heroes anyway, so I'd be deeply disappointed by everybody I encountered. But actually, I think the main reason is I think standards of healthcare would be terrifying, and I have an absolute fear of the dentist, and I don't have the best mouth of teeth, but I've always tried to look after them, and
I'm the same, yeah.
Right, and I have a wonderful dentist who understands me, and although I live on the Isle of Skye and he's in Oxfordshire, twice a year I make the pilgrimage to Oxfordshire so that he can look after my teeth. Because
wow.
So as I wouldn't be allowed, I assume, to travel back in the Napoleonic era with Tim, my dentist.
I never said you couldn't. I never said you couldn't take anybody.
Okay, but being realistic, I don't think Tim would want to go. I think he's got a very nice life where he is. So I think realistically, I would be a bit averse to travelling too far back in time because of life being nasty, brutish, and short too often. Is my true answer. So I think I'd go for the 60s. I'd like to have been older in the 60s. I was a little boy in the 60s, and I'd like to have been a teen, young adult in the 60s, because I think that's been a time to be alive and participating when optimism about the world was the dominant, just maybe only for 2 or 3 years, but I think to have experienced that would have been. I know there was also at the same time terror of nuclear war. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't perfect, but I think it would have been.
To be fair, we're back there, so
culturally, I think I would have loved to have been immersed in kind of the Beatles era. I'm a massive fan of that era of music, to have seen Jimi Hendrix perform in his pomp, all those sort of things, for me would have been, that would have been something. So I'll go with the 60s.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'd want to be back in Catherine Cookson time, and I would want to submit my first ever book to a publisher in that time period, because I wouldn't have the people saying to me, "You're dyslexic, we don't want to work with you." I would have had much more open feedback, and I think it would have been a lot nicer a scenario for me.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah, and I think I'd like to have met her and just to be able to say to her, you gave me the ability and the power to write when I didn't think that was even possible.
I'm sure.
Because I don't think she ever knew how much.
Exactly. I was
she
say, I'm sure
she'd
be absolutely delighted that it would be a high point of her career to have people say that.
Yeah, because you've got to remember, she had a blood disorder that they couldn't cure, and she couldn't have children.
Yep.
and she suffered with severe depression, and then her body completely gave up on her.
Oh.
To the point she couldn't even do the thing that she loved, which was writing.
Yeah, she was amazingly prolific, considering all of her.
Well, yeah, I mean, to see what she could do with a tape recorder was incredible. And she even still managed to get the voice of the everyday person.
Yeah.
Not, it was nothing fancy, it was the everyday person.
Yeah.
Really came through, and I think that's what I admire most than anything.
Yep.
She really did change the game.
Yeah.
So,
cool.
Maybe I'm an old record, but yeah, I have a super, super soft spot.
Nothing wrong with that.
Has there ever been a book that you have picked up and wished that you hadn't? Now, the reason I ask this before you answer is because I'm trying to show reviewers and readers out there that there is a way to turn around and say this book wasn't for me.
I've got one. I'm loath. If you don't mind, I'd rather not actually name the book, but just tell the story around it, so that it will deal with the issue I think you want to raise. So I was asked to review a book by someone I know.
Yes.
And he's an accomplished artist, multimedia artist, and I can't name his wife because you could identify them quite quickly if I say what she does, because it's a small world she works in, but she's very talented too. Yeah. Anyway, he's also a retired policeman. I think I can say that to them about. Anyway, so he asked me to review the one novel that he'd written, and it was unlike anything else I'd ever read, mainly because it was like 3 bits of novels stitched together that didn't really work together.
Right.
The first third was almost a kind of biblical fantasy feel about it, and was quite beautifully written.
Yeah.
And then the second third was kind of gritty and set in Glasgow.
Right.
And then the third element was set elsewhere in Scotland. And you could kind of imagine the second and third bit being part of the same novel, but the first bit, not so much. And it's almost like, but there was some beautiful writing in it, and there was some interesting insights in it. But it wasn't a novel, but I'd undertaken to review it, and indeed that included reviewing it on Amazon, which is what I said I'd do. So I had a real challenge, and I think this is exactly what you're getting at: is how do you respect the fact that this wasn't for me as a book? Indeed, I couldn't entirely see the logic of it all being put together in the one book.
Right.
But there was no way I was going to renege on my promise to review it, and there was no way that I was going to say anything offensive, because it's just my opinion at the end of the day. Someone else might feel differently. So I'm going to paraphrase, but roughly my review, for which on Amazon I gave it 3 stars, so I just thought that's entirely neutral. It didn't touch on anything or the other. My first line of my review was, if 5 people read this book, they'd probably all give it a different number of stars.
Okay.
Which is me acknowledging that there'll be someone else out there for whom
who'll love it.
What I thought was a mishmash would be their thing.
Yeah.
Equally, and possibly this is how I really felt about it, I didn't really think it was a novel, so it might have been 1 star. But there was some good writing in it. Anyway, so I averaged those 2, and I gave it 3, so it didn't do any damage, if you like, or nothing significant.
Yeah. How did that go down?
If you like, to describe the strength of the writing, and point out the interesting juxtaposition of the 3 different sections, which I said, for some people might prove challenging, and for others might be stimulating. And I basically gave enough of an insight that people would know that it wasn't a standard novel, that therefore approach with, if you like, caution, or have a sample first, get it on Kindle Unlimited or whatever it is you can do.
Yeah.
I'm not very techy. But so my takeaway on this was I gave it a review. I didn't tell any untruths about either the book. I gave a bit of a descriptive kind of overview of the book. I pointed out some obvious strengths and potential what some people might see as, not their cup of tea about it. So for me, that was the way I approached it, because I'd already promised to deliver the review. If circumstances had been different and I hadn't
known the author,
and I hadn't intended to ever review it, I would not have reviewed it. That would have been what I would have done. And if people think that's being deceitful, well, it isn't. All I'm doing is saying the amount of damage a single negative review does to a writer is hugely disproportionate compared to many positive reviews. And I wouldn't want it done to me. And without being deceitful, I do the respect of saying my opinion isn't worth so much as it's not worth somebody's career or somebody's, the future of somebody's book. So
confidence,
as you said, bite my tongue. And so that would always be my attitude.
I think it's confidence too, because I think a lot of people, I know for me, I've had a could not finish, and it was awful.
Yeah.
It just wrecked me, because I had put all this effort into making this fantasy novel easy to understand and easy to connect with from a completely innocent teenage perspective, and then to have 5 people write could not finish was just, it just floored me.
Yeah.
It floored me. So I decided when I did this podcast that I would bring it up and have everybody address it in their own way, so that we can get across why we shouldn't do this and why what we say really matters to people, and especially in this day and age.
I think you're absolutely right. It's very difficult, though, isn't it, to say to somebody, you're not entitled to your opinion, or indeed to express it, because we're not in the business of censorship. So what we're really saying is, please exercise a little bit of judgment and think about context. If I pick, one of the biggest sellers in the world and say I didn't like it, it has zero effect on that writer. It has no effect on them. And actually, by virtue of the status that their book and they as writers have risen to, they're almost legitimate targets, the wrong word, but it's legitimate to express your view on it, because it becomes part of, our shared culture. And I can't.
Yeah, you will find people.
That sort of book really isn't my cup of tea. I don't know what all the fuss is about, and that doesn't do anybody any harm. And I think that's fine. But if you know that you're dealing with someone who's got, like my first book, got 24 reviews on Amazon at the moment, I think, which is that for ages.
You're doing better than I am. My latest one only got one.
One review there can skew the whole likelihood that anyone else is going to buy that book for me, and. Just being a bit aware that, as you said very much earlier, for very many writers, it's not easy. They're not making a lot of money. They're not selling a lot of books. But it is very personal and important to them. And if you show a bit of awareness that that's what nearly all writers. If you've not heard a writer, that's probably the right way.
I would agree with that.
And
I think there's so much of us that are fighting to get the reviews because that's what the publishers want.
Right.
That's what the publishers need to see that we're doing well, or it's not just the sale figures now. It's about how people are responding and how people are reacting to your work and this and that. They forget it's so difficult to get anybody to review in the first place. And then if somebody goes on to put a review on and they've enjoyed the book, there's a good chance they won't review it, because they will stop and go, oh, that person didn't enjoy it. well, maybe I've done something wrong here.
It's not easy.
You know, yeah, maybe I shouldn't put up my thoughts or my review here because maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah. I'm going to say this. It's lazy. Publishers are being lazy looking at that information, which is not policed particularly effectively by anything, is one thing. Secondly, as you say, reviews that are, depending on the genre, depending on the writer, can be very misleading in terms of sales. I think we probably all know that 3 times as many people have said to us that they will review our book as have actually reviewed it. And there's something you can only ask about twice, and you've just got to leave it alone. So, you know, publishers could try a bit harder to find other ways of judging.
Or the famous thing I love when they say is, "Oh, tell us how you would market it." You know, like, and you're thinking to yourself, "Well, add a minute here. I wrote it. I fought to get it this far, and now you're telling me that I've got to also now tell you how to market it."
But when they say, so what you've got to do is tell me the 2 books it should sit between on Waterstone's shelf. It's like, no, I don't think you understand your job anymore. You know, you're supposed to tell me that. You know, I've done the art bit. Don't make me the business guy. I'm not the business guy. And it's what
90% of us have no idea about business.
It's unbelievable. And I suspect most of those of us who are with a small publisher who doesn't have a significant marketing budget spend at least as much time trying to get people to read our book as we did writing it, and it's soul destroying. Because
it is
everything about that process. I loathe all of it, and I would much rather get a mid-sized publisher take me on and just do a bit of marketing for me than win the bloody lottery. I'll be much happier with just that happening. That for me would be the most exciting thing that's happened to me in my life, to be honest. The most freeing, the most rewarding, and you can keep the money. I would just like my book to be out there to more people than I can get it out to, because I'm not a marketing expert. I don't know what I'm doing, and the one thing I'm not going to do is throw a load of money after it blindly to find that it has no effect.
I mean, to be honest, I would like the lottery money, and it's not for what you would think. I would want it so that I could, you know, being in that position of knowing I might have to do this myself, you know, being able to then pick up a publicist who I know you works incredibly well but is expensive, and say, right, here's your budget. If I don't see you turn around in 3 months, then you're done.
I get that.
You know, like that would be my solution to it.
That's it.
I probably wouldn't be a fan favorite for doing it that way, but I've gone into that point where I've done this for over 10 years now, and I am just done with the whole, oh, well, you know, you tell us how you want to do it, how you want to market it. No. To me, that's like the biggest slap in the face that us as writers, as we are writers, we can get. You know, it should never be like that. We should never have to tell somebody how to do their job.
Exactly.
They should know how to do the job.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely.
So going into your writing, how did you go about creating the darker elements in your story? Like, how did you get into that mindset, create that world that you could just disappear into?
So I don't think there's darker is the word I struggle with a bit, because as I say, my books are yarns really, and they're However, some, you know,
I think you knew what I was going with it.
So the Battle of Waterloo was my way in thinking in my first book about Napoleon, and there's plenty of things in that which are, you know, you've got to immerse yourself in what that battlefield would actually have been like in order to write about it effectively. So I'm the guy who owns 18 books about the uniforms of the battles of 1815, and has read loads and loads of different histories of the Battle of Waterloo, trying to find ways to do that. So that was the first book. The second book, Sharka's rule was pretty bloody and he was pretty ruthless, and there was a dark side to him. He almost went mad when his mother died and slaughtered a lot of people. So there was a genuine darkness there. And so he's a complex character to write about, particularly as there's not a lot of, as I say, there's only really folk memories of his life. So I've had to think about sort of what his psychological makeup was like and why he acted as he did. And I've actually made him quite a sympathetic character in the books I've written so far, which are relatively early in his reign. But I'm setting up for where he goes off the rails later and how that's going to impact others. And the way to do that is a combination of research, and we all have darker days, and depression is part of what affected Sharka without a doubt. And so we can all both research that, but also draw upon, and amplify our own experiences. I've never really been dogged by these things seriously, fortunately. But I did once have a bout of depression, which is a funny story, which I'll briefly share. I was in Zambia and I was unwell, and I was so unwell that I couldn't really be parted from the toilet facilities for very long. I'll put it that way. But I had to get on a flight back to London, and so I went to the doctor, and he said, well, as you know, Dr. Williams, I can give you these pills and they'll do the job, but they do have a psychological effect, and you will suffer from significant sort of depressive episodes for about 3 months. And I said, why do you say as I know? He said, well, you're a doctor, aren't you? I said, I am a doctor, but not a medicine.
You've got to kind of remind them of that.
Big blue pills, and I took them, and I said, it'll be fine. I've never really suffered from significant depression. I'll be absolutely fine. And I was really depressed for a couple of months. So that was my insight into, the black dog on your shoulder and all of that. And so I drew on that, chemically induced, but innocently experienced.
I mean, I suffer from it, and I'm not someone that hides that, and it is difficult. I have days where when I get like 14, 15 rejections come in.
Exactly, that's never a good day.
You know what I mean? It's like you're just like, oh fuck it, I'm going back to bed. This isn't worth it. So I get it.
I'm a coper, so my coping strategy is usually, because of where I live, is if that happens, I go climb a mountain. Takes my mind off.
See, I'm not able to do that.
I absolutely. But so for me, I have to go and completely change the whole context that I'm operating in to get out of that. And I think
I'd love to be able to do that.
And if you can't do that,
I'm waiting.
I suspect I would be much more prone.
Because to me, like I want to escape it. It's that natural experience where, when I was having a really bad week, I would go and I would ride horses, and I would just
that would do it.
Tear around on the beat, on the animal, and we would wear each other out, and we would work really hard together. And it or I would take the dog into the garden, and I would just keep throwing the ball till he was knackered, and I was knackered. And of course, it doesn't take long for somebody like me to get tired. But that was the point. The point of it was just to get to that moment of, I don't want to, I can't think about this, so I'm going to go and try everything I can to not think about
absolutely.
it.
Absolutely.
And I know that because right now I've seen 2 rejection emails coming in as we're on the podcast, so I'm like, it's going to be one of those days. Great.
Talk to me.
So,
think about it. Talk to me.
Yeah, exactly. So at least with the podcast, I do have that kind of form of escape to be able to go.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay, this is good. That's going to suck when I open it, but I get at least a decent conversation today with somebody. But I also think some of us as authors suffer from depression because we are very isolated.
Yeah,
we are very lonely.
It's a danger. Yeah.
And I think if we can start, having writing sessions together online or meetups and things like that, it would help a lot of people. And I think we would have less author suicides too, because I think it's so easy for an author to get into that cycle of, what's the point?
Yeah. Or I'm not.
What am I doing this for? I've just wasted my entire life when I could have gone and been in an office and worked and have a nice house and not, you know what I mean?
I know what you mean.
All that doubt kind of creeps in and it just suffocates you. So I think having that personal kind of connection to somebody could just actually ease that pressure a lot.
For sure.
So I'm also hoping to encourage authors, who are either bestsellers and who aren't, just to spend time with each other. Have people that you want to speak to once a week and just connect in with them and just be like, yeah, hey, how you doing? And just go for it. Just try and make the best out of every situation.
Sounds good.
So going into the next question, what inspired you to pick the type of genre for your writing that you did?
There's no point in me making this a long answer. So I was a history teacher. I loved history, and so I write historical fiction.
I knew you were going to say that.
That's it. That's it. There's no point making it more complicated. I enjoyed my job. I kind of am continuing the same life in a different style, if you like, in retirement. That's it.
I like the fact that you're also very adamant that you're writing what you know, because you've lived obviously in history and that kind of world. So you are using that additive of write what you know. Yeah,
I think that's right. But the thing that historians learn, history teachers learn, is they have to turn their hands to teaching all kinds of different bits of history in the length of a career. So everyone can, do their research and immerse themselves enough in a different period to shift periods. And I think that's a nice thing. And someone like Bernard Cornwell is a great example, who's written across 1,500 years at least. I think pretty convincingly, and he treats it because he's a historian at heart, essentially.
No, I like that. That's a really good answer, because I think a lot of people get really hung up on it was what I read, or it was what I thought I could do best, or you know what I mean. So it's nice to hear just a simple, straight to the point.
Yep.
Is there when you're writing, is your writing process like a movie where you see the scenes and you experience the scenes, or are you more like a jigsaw puzzle person where you're trying to put all the pieces together?
Yeah, I think that's it's kind of a movie's quite a good analogy. I'm not really a jigsaw puzzle person. I know writers who are. I at the moment I kind of think of it as like a Netflix series.
Yes.
That's kind of it. So more than a movie, because I don't know. As I've got older, I think I find that too many movies suffer from having too big a budget and not enough thought.
Yeah.
And a lot of what I call television, but we should probably call streaming now, result of a slightly more constrained budget and a lot more thought, and is often much better. So that a single episode of something that I admire on name any streaming service you want. I'm not being paid to advertise one or the other. Is more effective than a movie. So I often think I don't think if this was a Netflix series of my book, what would it look like? But I often think back to things that I've enjoyed, the way they've been presented. So an example of what I'm talking about is I've changed my mind about how you move between scenes a lot.
Okay.
So there would have been a time when I just wrote scenes that were connected to each other. And I'm much more happy now to chop and change or interlace several threads than I used to be. And I'm sure I know there's plenty of writers that do that, and I've read them, but seeing it kind of makes it really easy to understand, seeing it done on the screen. And so I think I quite draw on that is my answer.
It's interesting. That's a very interesting take, actually. Not what I expected there, to be honest. I myself, if I'm plotting, it's Jigsaw, and then when I write, it's the movie. So I'm able to kind of use both of it.
Before I'm plotting, there's a lot of bits. So you call that the Jigsaw. And then I think of a story arc, but then how do I carve up that arc is when I get into kind of the streaming analogy.
No, I get it. I think it's good to have that way where you can almost switch your mind to that point of how can I make it stand out, or how can I make it better?
Yeah, exactly. Or make it better.
And that's what plotting's for. That's that it's working out the kinks before you actually jump in and just go for it.
Yeah, I mean, if you've done a good job plotting, writing always feels a bit of an anticlimax because you're really just filling in the, you're just fleshing blanks, what you've already got, which can be a shame. But then funny enough, I quite enjoy that, the process before. The writing, quite painful, and then the editing I really enjoy, to make it better, as you put it.
Yeah, I think so too, and I think it's strange because we don't necessarily realise that we're making changes and we're making things better until we do it. And so I find that an interesting experience.
Yeah.
I do hate plotting, but I know plotting is a necessary evil to get me where I need to go.
The books that I think are more successful have been more thoroughly plotted on, and then are being executed, put into practice. When I'm trying, people who make it up as they go along, it depends on the genre, but there are so many potential pitfalls with that.
Yes. Anyway. Like forgetting the dog's name.
Yeah, like in my Richard Davis Chronicles, when I sit down to write the fourth one, I don't have as detailed a plot as I had to have for the first one, because all the characters are already developed. Well, most of the characters are already developed. They've been on quite a journey. We already know quite a lot about them. So, you're not starting at the beginning, and it's easier if you're not starting at the beginning to just. It's a bit more of an art, So I expect that one to be a lot easier than the first one when I get to it.
Yeah, I again, that's another case of, how do I put this? You're putting more time and effort and thought into it, and I think that's pretty incredible. To think that you're able to do that, and you're able to do it in such a way that it makes a difference.
Exactly. And that's the thing you have to set against all the rejection letters and everything, is if one person says to you, I really enjoyed that. Well,
that's what matters. But I am going to have to get you to read Marie's World, because I plotted the hell out of that book. And I want to know if I actually pulled it off with the plotting, or if I maybe over-plotted, because that is a thing.
Yeah. It is.
So I may send you an electronic copy and be like, can you?
I'm not very quick. Whenever anyone does that, I do read it, but it can be a few months before I get to it.
I don't care how long it takes.
If I don't, I've got a kind of schedule of I've got to read this and this in order to write the next thing, and if I don't do that, and at the moment, Phil Reed sent me the 5th edition part of her Guinevere series, and I'm reading that. A bit of feedback on that, and do you want the 6th one because you're enjoying it? I'm thinking, well, I do, but I don't, because if you give it to me, then I'll feel obligated to read it. If you give it to me after Christmas, I won't feel obligated until then. There's always that going in my head. But anyway, feel free.
Yeah, no, I think it's good as well if we're sharing with each other. We're learning from each other's crafts too.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's really important. We need to keep learning. We need to keep that, so our styles are adapting, and we're really pulling an audience deeper and deeper and deeper into what we're actually able to achieve, and what we're able to give them.
Sure.
But I might be wrong. I might be wrong. Is there a character that stayed with you the longest that you just have not been able to shake?
As in one I've already written about?
Yeah.
Well, there's a couple of different answers. I'll give you several short answers if I can. So I'm kind of now quite attached to my Richard Davey character, the kind of orphan history teacher who ends up in the past, because there's a bit of me in him, but he's more troubled than I am. I'm not an orphan, and I've never really I've had quite a nice life, so he's had a worse life than I have. But it's quite fun to write that, and I've got quite attached to him over 3 books so far. Looking more broadly, I always wanted to write a book which had Napoleon Bonaparte in it. So, because I was always really interested in him as a character, because I learned about him at school, I taught about him for most of my career here and there, and so I always said to people, one day I'm going to write a book about Napoleon. It's kind of probably not what I expected I'd write about Napoleon, but so for a long time, Napoleon's been in my mind as a character, and I know people think that's terrible because he's killed people, but he's a product of his age, get over it. The reality is, modern France owes a great debt to many of the things he did. And anyway, his rise was just extraordinary because he went from being a very marginalised kind of nobody to ruling a big chunk of, Europe, which is extraordinary. I'm not saying he was a nice man, but he's a very interesting man. So there's him. And clearly I could have said the same about Sharkis because that was a big... I lived in South Africa as a little child, and so he was quite a well-known figure in South Africa, obviously, much more so than in Europe or America. And so I'd always had an interest. I'd always kept up that interest. And I did quite a lot of African history when I was at uni. So he was there too. And then William Bowles is the last part of this answer, because I discovered his existence about 25 years ago, and it's been in the back of my mind ever since, and I slowly gathered together some bits of information about him. It was pre-internet when I discovered him, and I got hold of a couple of books about him, and kind of always knew I'd come back to his story one day, and so now that he's my current obsession, I guess. But I suspect I might leave him behind when I finish with him. I might have spent enough time in his company by then.
Is it a character you wish you could write more about? Is there one that you've just kind of...
Yeah, so there's a kind of sidekick in my Richard Davey Chronicles series called Emile, and he was part of Napoleon's bodyguard. And he fought in the Battle of Waterloo, and he's kind of the first Frenchman in 1815 that Richard meets, and who he's able to interact with, and they become friends, and he ends up on the African coast with Richard and Napoleon, and he is a military man by training, and he's trying to find his place in this new world. And he becomes a white Zulu warrior, and he goes through the training, and he joins one of the regiments, and he's in and out of the story here and there. But his story would be a good story to write. Other people have written about similar plots of a white Zulu warrior, so it wouldn't be original. But I'm fond of that character, and I'd quite like to follow his journey, which is largely now independent of the main characters. So Emile Berraud is his name, and one day there might be a book about Emile, the White Zulu warrior, if the world will allow such a thing.
Well, we never know. From one day to the next what we're up against. So I always try and remind people of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
If any of your stories was to become a film or TV series, which one would you choose?
So I reckon William Augustus Bowles' story would be a good film. I reckon you could do it in a film. A fast-paced film, the kind of Errol Flynn swashbuckling film version, but starring, I don't know. I put his picture on Facebook the other day, saying I'm writing a book about this guy. and somebody put in the message, I don't care who he is. Whoa! That was her view. I think she approved of the way he looked. He's a very handsome guy, so it would have to be the right actor. But I think that could go well as a movie. As a series, I would love to think there'd be a series, several series on Prime or whatever of the Richard Davey Chronicles. I think they could work, but you'd need a big budget. You can't set anything in the Battle of Waterloo, and quite a lot of the middle third of the first book is the Battle of Waterloo. That's really expensive to make.
Well, actually,
to make look realistic.
You'd be surprised how many war reenactors would actually do it for free, because it would give them a chance to do their ultimate battle reenactment. I just
think the whole logistics of it. I'm not a director. I'm not fucking for that job, but I do think that that they're.
Sorry, I knew a little bit about it. I don't know if that came across.
Reenactors are a great idea, and I follow quite a lot of reenactors on Instagram and things who do the Waterloo stuff.
Exactly.
I kind of think that could be quite fun. It's just probably a bit old-fashioned, those stories, but for the modern, not Stranger Things. Let's put it that way.
I think a lot of people are very interested in history now because of the fact that we've had another war, we've had another spy war started up again. I think people are just edgy, and I think that's where this need for being in history.
Maybe you're right.
Means the world, and I think we could see more of this coming, and I think that would be a very good thing.
I mean, there is supposed to be a big Napoleon movie that's been talked about for ages.
I've heard rumors about it, and I've seen snippets of filming, but I've never heard of a release date yet. Nope. And I hope that there is a release date, and I hope it's not a whoopsie. We were playing around with an idea and decided not to follow it, because that does happen in Hollywood. But I did see snippets because I'm in the Big Rap, which is a site that basically talks about the industry. It talks about the different books or different scripts that are being done and who's making them. And I mean, there was a beautiful vampire writer called Rachel Mead, and she struggled for years to get her books to be made into a TV series. She had a small indie film made of it, and she loved it. And then the next thing she knows now is it's finally a TV series with Julia Plec, who actually made the Vampire Diaries famous. So it's amazing. If you know the right people, that's the key. I think it's like knowing the right people is. That's why networking is so important.
Maybe that's it. I mean, I do have a friend whose books were serialized by Netflix, so 2 series, and it still didn't make him rich. Still didn't make him more money than the book. He still didn't make him rich. He still has to work for them. So there we go.
Yeah, of course, but that's not really the point of it, though.
Anyway,
the point of it, though, is not to make money. It's about telling your story, the stories that keep you awake at night.
I would love to know what he thinks about them, because they weren't like the book, particularly the second series, nothing like the book, and you do wonder whether they were listening to a whole load of focus groups who were telling them one thing, and they weren't listening to the right. Well, I don't know how much input he had. I didn't like to ask.
They never tend to listen to the writer over the
I'm sure they
the groups.
But they should have paid attention to what was good about the book, rather than what superficially looked good with CGI. Anyway.
But that's just part of the world that we live in now. Is that we're governed by the viewers and not about what the authors put in or how special the work is or anything like that. It's about, well, can we sell it? How much profit will we make?
Exactly.
Yeah, and I hate that, but that is the very real
No doubt.
the real story.
No
And that's good that we're telling people this, because they have this sort of notion that you sign a contract and next thing you know everything's made, and it's not that easy.
For sure.
What's the hardest challenge that you've ever faced, and what's your best experience that you've had in writing?
So these are both about in writing.
Yeah.
I think taking a whole load of jumbled ideas that have accumulated over 20 years and trying to decide how that could become a book when you've not written a really cohesive novel before. Although I had many failed attempts in draws, some of which were long, but nothing where I went, that had a beginning, a middle and end and kind of worked, even if no one else wanted it. So doing that the first time was the big challenge, because for all that you read loads of books about how to do it and you've read lots yourself and so you kind of have lots of reference points, but just doing it's just a logistical kind of challenge, and you pretty quickly realise, well, there are a lot of characters to juggle here, and how do you manage that? And I just have cards for all the characters and all their characteristics on each card, so that I don't get it wrong. And I could do it on the computer, but I don't want to do it on the computer. I like chucking the cards and putting them in different stacks for different parts of the book and that kind of thing. So working all that out was a big challenge the first time round, and then once you've got a system that works for you, not saying it's transferable to others, so that would be that. And then what was the best experience I've ever had writing? So I think it wasn't actually writing, it was kind of reception of my writing. Because there was a reviewer in New Orleans who he's a black entrepreneur who runs a tea company, a company that makes different blends of tea and distributes them. And she does this. She has this YouTube channel where she reviews 3 or 4 books and recommends a blend of her tea to drink with the book. Kind of a fun little way of doing it. And she said she wanted to review my book, and I thought, well, so to get Kindle because it's in America, it'll cost too much to get the paperback. Anyway, so months went by and I didn't hear anything, and I emailed her once and said, wondered if you were close to doing the book or how it's going. And she said, it's about to drop, and she sent me all the details. Anyway, I click on the link and I watch her review, and I'm the 4th book of the 4, and the first book gets picked up about 2.5 minutes, second book 2.5 minutes, third book 2.5 minutes, my book 18.5 minutes to talk about my book.
Wow.
And she starts off, just by saying, when I first started reading this, I wasn't sure, I put it aside, and then I felt like I was in the mood and I picked it up, and she went, oh my god, I have to tell you, this is a book you have to read. And she just went on in a really coherent and enthusiastic way to talk about my book the way I thought about my book. It was like she was in my head, and she was from a very different kind of background and everything, but she just got it. She saw it the way I saw it, she read it the way I intended someone to read it, and it was just very moving. And I don't think it particularly had a huge number of views or massive reach. It certainly doesn't seem to have had an enormous impact on my sales, but it just made me feel wonderful, because here was someone, my book had reached exactly as I intended. So for me, that's like the most exciting thing.
But that's important, because she would never have thought to pick up somebody from, necessarily from England who's written that. And you've changed her conversation. You've changed the way she's thinking.
More than that, she had bought the paperback because she waived it on the show. So it would have cost more to have it shipped out than the cost of the cover price. But she had bought the actual paperback, and her husband was reading it, and she was going to read the second one, and it was great. So that's word of mouth. Us, as you rightly said, it's not about getting rich, but it is about having people read the book.
Yeah, and it's about you kind of almost have to accept that we hate media. I mean, come on, if we were honest, we would rather be doing 101 things other than what we're doing right now.
Sure.
But we do it because we know that it's the only way that people are going to know what our stuff is and what it's about.
Absolutely, and I have to say, Crystal, we appreciate the people who facilitate that. Because not all of us have the the ability to do that.
Yeah, and that's why I said, like, I've done so many media things where people have said, "Oh yeah, I've read your book," and they haven't read the book.
Oh.
You know, and in it's so frustrating because you know they haven't. You can't call them out because it's their show, their time, and that's why I wanted this to be something special. And I say to people, if I've been given their book and I haven't had a chance to finish it yet because I have dyslexia and it takes me a bit longer, I say, "Hey, I didn't get to finish it, but here's the thing. This is what I think so far. Yeah. This is what I think of your style. This is what I think of your technique."
Yeah, and that gives the writer the opportunity to talk both about the bit you've asked and say, and interestingly, what comes next, without, spoiler alert, but you can explore things as long as someone's got a bit of a sense of how you write and the characters. Then
but
you can have a conversation.
If you look close enough, you can tell how somebody writes. You can kind of almost piece together how all that little bits and pieces work together and how they've come to put their story together. And I think that's really important. And, you just have to kind of stitch things together sometimes, and sometimes things will not make any sense. But it's good because you're getting an opportunity to learn what you think works and what you think doesn't work, and what you can apply to your writing and what you think should never be applied to your writing. So what I've got to ask now is, what is the best technique you've ever used for writing, and what is the worst technique you've ever tried to use?
Okay, so I just going to do it the other way around. So the worst technique, without a doubt, because I had loads of experience with this, is rushing into writing something without enough planning. Never, ever worked for me, okay? I always end up tying myself up in knots, disappearing down a rabbit hole, hopefully. And largely that always happened when I didn't have enough time to write. So I wanted the pleasure of the creative process, but I didn't have enough time to, dedicate to it. So the bit I enjoyed in those days was the actual writing and so on. And really, you end up you might as well be writing about your death. If you just want to write something descriptive, do a still life painting rather than a more complex composition. So that's what I learned through lots of failed attempts. And I didn't have time because I was working full time. Life was complicated, and I was just going an hour here and an hour there. You lose the thread of things. So you need time and you need a plan. So that's something I do. Other people may be different, but that's my bit of advice. So my worst technique was just roughing it up. So my most successful technique, I think, is a bit dull maybe, but it is just edit a lot, and always in editing to make it shorter. It seems to me to work for me. I am sometimes a bit guilty of liking 3 adjectives where one will do and all that kind of thing when I'm writing the first time. And that's not a bad thing, because when you go back and go back to the best of 3 adjectives and take the other 2 out, it kind of works. But so that editing process is effective because it usually makes the book manageable, increases immediacy, I think, and gives you an opportunity to reflect on your first or second try. And I rather enjoy, as I think I said earlier, that process of, it's a bit like, without being as good as this, they say that I think Michelangelo, he would look at a lump of marble and you could already see the statue that he wanted inside it, and his job was just to chip away the excess to reveal it.
Yeah.
Well, in a way, that's kind of how
what we're doing with books,
when I'm editing the book, is I've got the lump, but to get it in the exact shape I want rather than the rough shape, I've got to remove more than I've got to add. And I think that,
of course,
basically, that always thinking, take stuff out. It's back to Hemingway and those sort of writers where, they have a
very true
economic style, which I never really successfully emulate, but I use as a kind of reference point.
What is the first thing you do when you want to de-stress from editing and writing?
Go for a walk. Go
for
a walk, either with the dog or up a hill. because the dog is a mountain dog. She's a Pyrenean mountain dog, but she's now too lazy to go up a hill. So either walk on the flat with the dog or go up a hill on my own.
Or you could just get one of those dog treats on the end of a stick and just hold it in front of her as you're going up the hill.
I don't know how long that would work for. It would initially, yeah, but it'd be a short hill. So because it's a change, it's a reset, it's a change of context. It's also about health, it's exercise, it's fresh air, and if I've done that, I can eat what I like that day without worrying about the consequences as well. So yeah, that's what I would do.
See, I don't have that issue. Like, I find it hilarious when people are all like, oh, I have to watch what I'm eating, and I'm like, I have never been able to put weight on in my life.
Yeah, well, we're all,
so,
that's...
I would love that worry of having, to watch what I'm eating. I hate it, because I always get that judgmentalness from the hospital of, oh my god, you're too thin, and you're anorexic and all this other stuff. So it'd be nice, would be nice to not get judged.
Definitely. I don't do it because other people. I'm not controlling my weight because other people are judging me. I could care less what other people think about me at my age. But it's more about just I'm still very active and I'm lucky.
You want to stay active, yeah.
So I want to stay active. So it's really part of that.
Yeah, of course. What hobbies do you enjoy, and which ones do you wish you could explore more of?
So, I'm kind of covered it. So, I'm a big hill walker, and I'm trying to climb all the 2,000-foot mountains in Scotland at the moment. I'm quite a way into that. So I want to do all of them. So, the rest of that is what I want to do, and I will get there, I think, if my knees hold up. I do a lot of skiing as well, and I'm due to go skiing with my 88-year-old father in January.
Wow.
He's still going, still skiing. So that's good. We're off to do that. Skiing, and I play hockey every week for the Ireland mixed hockey team.
That's pretty awesome.
So those are sort of my hobbies really, outside writing, which is a hobby too. And I love music, and I've been training to have a radio show on our local community radio station, which I've had to put slightly on the back burner for a variety of not very important reasons. So probably next spring I'll be starting a show.
That would be fun.
Sky and Lockout Radio, because I love my music. So yeah.
You could always sneak an author on every so often.
Well, it's a payback because I only really got into it because Carol Horton, who has a Sunday morning show on Sky Radio, she had me on to talk about my first book, and then was nice about it, and then had me on to talk about the sequel, and was nice about it. And she said to me, "You're quite a natural sort of way about you on the radio.
You do.
You should think about this." And I got a couple of other people who listened to those shows say to me, "You sounded really natural. Have you ever thought about doing it?" And that got me thinking.
I got the same thing, and I ended up doing the podcast.
Thank you. So yeah, that's might be so I might get a bit better with technology if I've had.
It's not that hard. Honestly,
it's a bit daunting. It's like anything when you're using it regularly. It's fine. It's getting over the hump there of that.
Yeah, it's the first time.
In my head, and I'm at that age where we're a bit more averse to new stuff. It's harder to.
Yeah, of course. You're getting that where you're comfortable in your ways, and you're just not really wanting to go exploring outside of it.
I've kind of committed to doing it, so it's good for me, and I'm looking.
It's good for you, yeah.
Getting out on the air.
What's the first thing you do in the morning?
So, it's clean my teeth. We'll get out of bed and clean my teeth, and there's a story to that, which is that when I was a little boy, like most kids, I didn't really want to clean my teeth, and I still remember to this day my father saying to me, and this will sound terribly cruel, but it wasn't meant that way, if you don't clean your teeth, they'll dissolve. The acid bacteria will eat away at them and they'll dissolve. And it was such a vivid image, and I just went, oh my God. And ever since then, I clean my teeth morning and evening, and
I do it too.
And I have to, and I cannot possibly sleep if I haven't. And if I wake up in the middle of the night because I've had too much to drink and realise I haven't cleaned my teeth, I will get up and clean my teeth. And having said that, I can be off my face and I will still clean my teeth before I go to bed.
I've done that too.
It's kind of obsessive. So it's a very simple answer. It's clean my teeth and then probably let the dog out. If my wife wants me to it.
People need to understand is if you don't let the dog out first,
consequences.
Oh, there's consequences.
Yeah.
What do you look forward to the most in your writing career and in life?
I think positive feedback about something you've written is the thing I'm learning.
Yeah.
I thought it would be sales, and I wanted it to be sales, but it isn't going to be sales. So I would say, some positive feedback is just a lovely thing to hear. When you know it's genuine. So ideally, from a complete stranger, who says, "I read your book and I really enjoyed it." That's lovely. So somebody said to me the other day, "I want to buy," who had already bought my first 2 books of my Richard Davey Chronicles, said, "I want to buy 3 more of each to give to people for Christmas because I think this is a great book. They were great read, and how lovely." So that for me is about as lovely as anything can be. So I couldn't be happier than with that. Sorry, I've forgotten the other question.
There was only one. I just said, what do you look forward to the most? Whether it's writing or whether it's your life, and you answered that.
So. Yeah, I mean, there are other things in life that are more important than someone telling you they like my reading, I guess. Family and stuff like the rest of us. But I'm very lucky. I live on a beautiful island, and I have, my friends are all over the world. But it's lovely when we do get together, and I've got to the age where, when we meet up, we might not have seen each other for 2 or 3 years, as a lot of us have experienced thanks to COVID and stuff, obviously. And you just pick up where you left off, and that's another lovely thing about being
I like that too.
Yeah.
Well, because I had that experience with my aunt. My aunt was down here recently for 5 days, and we were roommates for 5 days. And I've not done roommating in so long.
Right.
And I liked it because we were lying next to each other. There was like a bedside table between our beds, and we talked books. And then both of us had a night where we were in so much pain because we'd overdone it. She had a busted ankle. I have busted legs, and we're both lying there in pain, but we're keeping each other company at the same time. You're in it together. It's just odd.
There's a lot to be said for shared anything, really, isn't there?
Yeah, and we share books.
Cool.
My grandmother installed it into her, and then she installed it into me. And then, of course, my aunt's just kind of kept it going since she passed. But it's good because it's almost that connection between us where we look at each other and go, like, we get it, we get what
being
what
on the
we're
same
doing
wavelength
here.
is a great thing.
Yeah, it's good. It's fun, if nothing else. So I myself have idiopathic rheumatoid arthritis, which makes me slow down and appreciate the day. What would you say makes you slow down and smell the roses?
I'm not great at this, I'll be honest with you. So I'm always in a hurry, and I've always been impatient, which is a terrible thing for a writer. And I think writing, as much as anything, has been good for me, because you have to slow down if you're going to do it half decently. So in a funny sort of way, that writing sorted my answer to that, I think. The other thing is getting out in the mountains, because you just have to go at the appropriate pace. If you rush it, you'll wear yourself out, you won't get to the end of the climb, and so on. So it's a kind of combination of those two.
It's good. For me, I have to just be aware of however far I walk is however far I gotta go walk back. Yeah, so I almost have to do the calculation in my brain.
Yeah. Whatever sort of walking you're doing, that's so true. We now have to do that for our dog too, because she's lazy and she's getting old, and so we often have conversations about, do you think we ought to turn around now because she's got to walk just as far again?
We got to get her back home. Yeah,
and she just gets slower and slower and slower, and she weighs 50-something kilos, so I don't want to be carrying her.
No, you don't. You will definitely blow your back and knees doing that.
I couldn't.
Yeah. Where's your favorite place to curl up during the day? Do you have the garden, cafe, reader's nook? Where do you like to go?
I'm not a particularly have a kind of. I like my desk where I work. It's huge because I've got loads of stuff on it, and I got a view. I can see a mountain out of my window, which is pretty cool. So I'm not curled up here though. I'm working here, but I quite often I've got quite a comfy office chair. I quite often just sit in it and stare out the window. But otherwise,
Yeah.
it's on the sofa watching the TV, to be honest. It's as likely as anywhere. If I want a break from doing this, I'll go and watch something as a distraction for an hour and put my feet up and sit on the sofa, and the dog will be at my feet, and that's probably...
Yeah, it's lovely.
It's good.
Yeah.
It's good. Or any coffee shop. I like it.
I love a good coffee shop too.
That's another one.
That's my plans for tomorrow.
Smell of coffee, notebook, happy days. Chuck me out on it.
I have my first day in Nano tomorrow, and I've got to do, I think it's like 2,000 words.
Right.
Of my book. So I had plans to pack up my computer and get a bus to Stirling.
Right.
Go into whatever coffee shop I can find and just write till I get it done. But whether I can get the confidence to go is a different story. I might just end up doing it at home.
Well,
but,
that's easy.
But that's just me. I'm trying to gain my confidence back after COVID and everything.
I completely understand that.
Yeah, especially with all the health conditions and stuff.
Yeah.
You
know? I'm not going to make a religious point, but my wife and I go to a local Episcopal church in Scotland, in Portree, our little town, and a lot of our congregation hadn't come back. Because it's what you say, they haven't got their confidence back that, because we were shut for quite a while, and then we were social distancing and wearing masks, and understandably they didn't want to come to any of that. And even though now we're sort of back to normal, there's still a prevalence of it out there, and also they're older and they've got out of the habit of travelling, and I don't think they'll all come back. It's sad, but I understand. I completely understand.
Yeah, I mean, I used to go to the Helensburgh Baptist Church because I could walk there, and I loved it. And then COVID hit, and I was like, "Well, what? I can't go to church. This is weird."
Yeah.
And I started doing it online, and I actually enjoy it online.
Yeah, we did it online.
Yeah, and
I know
it's not the same being together, but for somebody who's got health issues, who's in and out the hospital all the time, it's like a lifeline that people don't get.
We were very lucky. We had quite a technical guy in our congregation, although he's very old, and he filmed all of our services when we were open throughout that all of that period until quite recently. There still is the cathedral in our diocese still does it every Sunday, so people can do it online. But for a long time, people could actually feel like they were part of our service with the people they were used to seeing in the congregation, which is fun because it was the local church doing it.
It's good. It's good because it also means, like, for people that are elderly and they can't physically get anymore, they can still feel like they're part of the worship.
That's right.
And
although we
important.
have several members of the congregation who are in wheelchairs, and I think for them it's a good opportunity to get out of the house and mix with people who know them, that they feel comfortable with. So we obviously, like in churches these days, we've got the ramps and the facilities.
I also tried, like, remind my family, who are totally not COVID concerned.
Right.
When you're coming to see me, take COVID test before you see me, because I am the kind of person that will end up in ICU.
Exactly.
And I don't want that.
It's different, but because my dad's a good age now, and he's fine, as far as we know. But Helen and I, we're about to get because we're over 55, we're about to get our 4th jab before we go down to see it next time, so that we'll have the maximum coverage that we can have had, as you say, to help protect him. We'll still test as well, but it's a nice feeling that the most tuned jab that accounts for Omicron 2 will be in our arm before we see him.
Yeah, I mean, I know I'm supposed to go get the 5th, but they've made it so difficult for me now to get it that I can't get it. So until I move somewhere that I can physically go to, like an area that does the JAG, I won't get my 5th one. Because how my body works is it doesn't hold on to ways to kill off viruses. I have no immunity. And what I do have immunity for is like polio, diphtheria. Those are the big bad ones I have. But like chicken pox, German measles, all that, I don't have it. So, and it's the same with COVID.
Right.
I don't seem to be holding on to COVID. So,
be careful.
Yeah. I have to be careful, and I have to go get these injections. But I can't right now. I can't. No. It's a nightmare. Especially with my partner working crazy hours with the bus driving.
Right.
So yeah, and I feel for him too, because he's doing all these crazy shifts, so they're so short staffed on the mainland right now. You can tell it's wearing him really, really thin.
Yeah. It's.
And I think they're going to strike. So to be honest with you, I think they're going to strike.
Oh, dear. It's a mess, isn't it? Anyway.
Well, we've got the post office is striking, and
trains.
So I don't know who's not striking now.
Yeah.
So, going into the word game.
Right.
This is the last portion of the podcast and the most fun.
Okay.
This is when we will give a word, and you've got to come up with the first book. If you get stuck, I have a list that I will throw at you, and maybe one of my suggestions will knock something loose in you. So your first word is coffee.
Yeah. Nothing. Got nothing.
Okay.
All the time. I can't think of a book. No, I've got one. Okay. Yeah. So Marcel Proust, In Search of Lost Time, because he starts all off with a coffee and a Madeleine. It's the start of everything, and that.
See, I was going to say
the whole thing.
Yeah, I was going to say Omens by Kelly Armstrong, because there's this little coffee shop diner where this sort of very fantasy thriller. It's the weirdest book I've ever read, because it's fantasy, it's paranormal, it's suspense, it's crime, it's detective work, all in one book.
Wow,
and
that's a challenge.
I couldn't get my head around it the entire time I was reading it. I was like, what genre is this supposed to be?
But was it good?
But yeah.
Was it good?
Yep. It's a good book. It's really, really different.
Right. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. I do recommend that for you. It is a small series, but it's good because it is so different. And it's nice to kind of get out of comfort zone, I think, sometimes. What about books? That's your next word. Books.
Yeah. I kind of want to think of something with a library in it. I'm thinking, it's not a specific book. It's more a writer, I think, and I just always think of Agatha Christie.
Yeah,
and those
because she always has a book or something in her series.
Yeah, and there were, for all the flaws that people are so keen to find in Agatha Christie's books, there's a reason for the enduring popularity of the stories, and that is obviously they can be set anywhere, and she just had the right sort of mind to write those books. And I personally really like the era that she happened to be writing them in. So what for her was writing in the present has become kind of a historical setting over time, and I enjoy that a lot. So, and who doesn't love a library? I mean, for me, it's the best room.
It is. I must admit, because I own so many bookshelves and I own so many books, I'm trying to get my husband to find a place where we can just make a third bedroom into a library that I can go.
I was once lucky enough. So we once had a house which had a dining room, and we weren't that sort of people. That's because we had a big table in the kitchen, and that was fine. So the dining room became a library, and we just had water walls. We had all the bookcases, and it was perfect. It was just a dream. Yeah. A dream.
That's what I hope to do.
Yeah. Good luck with that.
Yeah.
Lovely.
Especially because we're going to raise kids, and I think it's so important for them to be surrounded by books.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Leather armchairs.
Leather armchairs.
I think of Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, that's a good one. I like that. It's sort of the same thing, isn't it? You want something the right period, maybe maybe I'll say Jules Verne, around the Age days, that in the club at the beginning and the end, where the challenge is issued, and that kind of, he lived that very safe life, and then he didn't, and it changed him the time he came back. So the guy who sat in the chair before he went, and the guy who sat back in the chair when he came back was very different. So I think that's Red Armchairs, yeah.
The other one is, and I can't remember the name of the series, but it was Rachel Kane's library series, stuck out with me. And essentially the idea of that is libraries own all knowledge.
Yeah.
So whatever book, you get a blank, and it's like a fake book. Like a Kindle, but it actually feels like a book.
Right.
And when you open it, it can be any book in the world. But books are restricted, and you can only access certain books. Okay. And it's the idea of them controlling the knowledge in the world. I think it's just different. It's just such a different idea. What about swirling staircases?
So like spiral ones?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Different.
My dad's got one in his house. Does that count? I think.
Well, it might inspire something out of you if your dad has one.
Well, I can think of the books that are upstairs in that room. That's a whole other story.
Well, there you go.
That's a whole other story. So that would take me into. I think I'm looking at the shelf. What have we got on that shelf that's worth mentioning? It's full of. I'll tell you what it's full of. It's full of books. We used to live in Canada, and it's full of the sort of books you bought for 99 cents in the second-hand bookstore. That era when they painted the spines of all their books like bright orange or bright yellow or bright green. So I don't know why they did that. And there's a whole load of books like that about surfing in California, and really cheesy, awful books. Well, there's no awful book, but disposable books, and yet they weren't. They were being recycled. Someone said books will be read, and you bought them because they were cheap and read them, and sometimes gave them back, and sometimes they ended up on the shelf. Books like Rocky the Raccoon, a story of a raccoon called Rocky, nothing to do with the one in the Beatles song. That's my link with.
Well, for me, it was Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas, because it's always got spiral staircases in it. Right. And there's one that's actually got Spiral Staircase to Heaven, which is like a big house that's on top of a mountain, and the only way you can get to it is a spiral staircase in the middle of the mountain.
Nice. Good.
Yeah. What about gas lamps or gas lights?
Well, I hope I'm allowed to mention one of my own books, but
you're definitely like that.
So in Rescuing Richard, which isn't out yet, Richard ends up in London in 1820. I can't remember. Say 1827, but that might be. I've got my own book now, and it's so that there is gas lighting in some of the wealthier areas of London by this time, and there's a scene where he's got rooms in the Adelphi, which is a very grand sort of. They didn't really have hotels nowadays, but it's like a proto hotel, really, where you hired a suite of rooms, and he's looking out of the window and he's watching the lamplighter going along, lighting the lamps, and the sort of almost sulphurous yellow glow coming out of them. It's a kind of wintry, snowy day, and I like that scene. I think it's quite atmospheric, and so that's got gas lights in it.
I was thinking of The Moth by Catherine Cookson. Yeah. She has a beautiful scene with them lighting the street lights. And there's like this really emotional big purpose for that when it comes to the main character of the story. And how that's a moment where she has this feeling of safety and feeling of not being alone in the world.
Interesting, because there is a thing, isn't there, about, I think, light, that it's about us trying to control the world. We're putting light where nature hasn't put light, and that is a lot about the human being's place in the world, and in a way it does make us feel safer because it's the fire writ large, isn't it? Writing.
It's the thing that kept us warm.
The wolves and everything that's out there that we potentially wanted to read. So I think they're very comfortable about that. Yeah.
It allowed us to have strength, and it gave us the ability to feed each other.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's really good, and I like how she took that powerfulness of it, and she used it in such a simple scene that had like that resonating power to it. That just What about rugs?
Oh, it's got to be Arabian Nights, hasn't it? And magic carpet. When I see rugs, I think of a magic carpet. And as a kid, sitting on one, waiting for it to fly me away, and it didn't, but then you fly away in your head, reading those sort of the Arabian Night stories was. Yeah.
I also like the Raven Cycle by Maggie Stiefvater, because she has a lot of those kind of elements of somebody who's desperately trying to escape their situation, escape their life, and that they sit on rugs a lot, especially if you're a little kid. I don't know if you did that when you had reading time at school and you all had to sit on the rug.
That rug. Don't get off the rug.
Yeah,
that's the only way they can stop me. Yeah.
So that to me kind of like it's a thing that sticks in my head.
Yeah.
Like it's weird how childhood things can stay with. Open fireplaces.
Yeah, I kind of think of Shakespeare and Falstaff and those sort of characters, and the old kitchens and the big fireplaces and roasting and all of that. So I've got that kind of, I want to say it's almost a medieval hall kind of image in my head. But who doesn't love an open fireplace? And on the other hand, what a great place to sit and read. A proper English book where you can sit right inside. Wonderful.
And you feel warm too. It's like coziness.
Absolutely.
And after about 20 pages, you accidentally fall asleep.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I think that's part of why I love it. It was like the one thing I could do when I was at home and I wasn't ill, was to curl up next to the electric fire we had in our old home, and I would get a chance to read one of my books, or my mom would read one of my books to me, and that was my thing. That was like my exit out of the stress of being a child with illness. So I think it's great. Yeah. And last but not least, dark corners.
Yeah. So in Ursula Le Guin's book, there are some dark corners and things that are almost from another plane that are like shadowy, demon, ghost, terrifying things that get led into Earthsea, the world of Earthsea, that shouldn't be in there, and that you're best off when they stay in the dark corners, and when they're not in the dark corners, they're causing a lot of trouble, and the main character spends quite a lot of his time trying to put them back in the dimension where they belong, and so I always, and I've only read these quite recently, but it tapped into lots of other stories that I read when I was younger, and the sort of ones that always made you a bit wary of not having a light on somewhere in your bedroom. So I'm actually quite glad I read these when I was a lot older.
It makes me think of Old Magic by Marianne Curley.
Right.
That one was spooky.
Yeah.
It was just that kind of spooky that stuck with you, and I was always scared that the villain was going to crawl out of the book in the middle of the night, so I used to tie it up with ribbon, and I would sort of make sure there was something on top of it when I would go to sleep, and my mom was like, "You're demented, Crystal."
Terry Pratchett would approve, because he knows that books about magic are full of magic and can do magic, and libraries.
They'll come and get you.
They're all sentient books. They're a thing.
I always think on it like, ooh, they're gonna crawl out of there, you know.
Yeah, I do.
So I always had that kind of weird obsession where I'm like, I don't want this to crawl out and get me.
Yeah.
So but which I think is kind of funny, but yeah. So, well, that is the end of the podcast.
Super. Thank you for having me.
I think it's been a lot of fun, and I think we've done a lot of really positive discussions. And this is a great safe place for doing those discussions and changing publishing as we know it, because that's our job. Be the people that leaves the world better than how we found it. So, yeah, I have been honored to have you on, and as I say to everyone, this is an open invitation, so please come back.
Thank you very much.
And we will talk about your next upcoming release.
When I've got something else to talk about.
Yeah, of course.
Write some more books first. Yeah.
Maybe next time you can come on and talk to me about my historical if I ever get it published, or my crime novel if I ever get it published. So
good luck with
that would be a lot of fun too.
Yeah, keep going. Don't listen to the rejection.
The rejection does get to me. I must admit. I'm not completely immune.
My publisher keeps saying to me, look, even J.K. Rowling got rejected lots and lots of times. So,
Yeah. She did. She did.
18 times. 18 people passed over the opportunity to publish.
I'm passed over all the time. I think I've kind of gotten to that point where I don't
think I've got Harry Potter up my sleeve either. But it's worth remembering that it's all part of the process of being a writer, unfortunately. Everyone goes through it. Everyone goes through it.
Yeah.
I mean, when she submitted a book under somebody else's name after Harry Potter, she got rejected. Which makes me laugh.
But I think that there's more to her story than actually we know about. And I think it'd be really awesome if one day she kind of opened up a little bit more and explained her journey.
It's up to her, because she's got her relationship with the media and she knows what she thinks about.
Maybe she just needs the right podcast.
Well, maybe she does. Maybe you should reach out to her. I
did, and I got rejected. So.
But at least you tried. But
I wanted her to have a safe space. So she could come on and talk, and
there's no, for her, I don't think she's very confident there is a safe space, because it's not what you do; it's what someone does with what's been said later, isn't it? And how it gets re-reported or soundbited. That's not a word, but you know what I mean.
Oh no, I do get what you mean, and I completely understand where she's from. I was one of those kids. I was on Jim Will Fix It. I know exactly what it feels like. To be unsure of what you're saying, because I was in that position and it's awful. But it has been an absolute pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much.
And I hope you share it with your friends and be like, hey, you want to check this podcast out.
Yep. I look forward to it. But we've got to wait before that happens, haven't I? April or May, yeah?
Yep, it'll be end of April, beginning of May, hopefully.
Cool.
And then
we will look forward to it.
We'll be having probably another conversation then. I hope we will. You never know.
Absolutely.
But yeah, no. And guys, you'll want to check back next week, as we have some crazy guests coming in that I don't even know how this is gonna go. So enjoy, and make sure you check out Gareth's work today.